Christy Wesselman was born on April 19, 1970, in Chicago, Illinois, USA. By 1985, her parents had divorced and moved away. After the divorce, Christy and her siblings stayed with their mother in Glen Ellen, a suburban town near Chicago with a population of fewer than 30,000. Christy has attended a variety of schools, but she has always made new friends quickly. The family chose to live in this quiet suburb because it was one of the safest areas in the region. During the 1980s, children felt safe playing outside without adult supervision, and not all residents locked their doors at night. Unfortunately, this peaceful time didn't last forever. Christy was a bright student with good grades and intended to go to college. She was also athletic, playing softball and volleyball, which helped her become popular among her peers. She had many friends. As she started high school, Christy became the class leader. She had a bold perspective on life for her age. In 1984, she even met then-President Ronald Reagan. While many were worried about this meeting, when her mother, Sandra, asked her if she was anxious, she confidently replied that she was not, stating that he was just a human being. Christy maintained a positive outlook throughout her life. In July 1985, during the summer vacation, Christy's mother, Sandra, was busy working to provide for her 3 children. Because she couldn't spend much time with them, she sent her youngest child, Christy, to all-day summer classes or camp. The children would return home by 5 or 6 p.m. On July 21, 1985, the family gathered for dinner after classes. Christy asked her mother if she could go to the supermarket to buy soda and a chocolate bar. Her mother agreed, believing it would be a quick trip since the store was only a 20-minute walk away. However, an hour passed, and she still hadn't returned. Initially, her mother wasn't worried, thinking Christy might have run into a classmate or decided to visit a friend, which wasn't unusual for an active teenager. As more time passed with no sign of Christy, her mother began to feel anxious. She decided to head to the supermarket herself to find out why Christy was delayed. On her way, she encountered several of Christy's classmates, but none had seen her. Once back home, she called all the friends she could think of, but no one had seen Christy. As darkness fell and it grew past 8 p.m., her concern turned into fear, prompting her to contact the police for help in the search. Law enforcement took this case very seriously from the start. They visited Christy's home to speak with Christy's mother and gather a description of her. They also compiled a complete list of friends and acquaintances she might have gone to see. The police visited all the addresses provided, but unfortunately, no one they spoke with had any useful information, leading to concerns that Christy might be missing. The next step for the police was to visit the last known location where she was seen, the supermarket. At the supermarket, they interviewed the security guard and staff members. A security guard, who was also a familiar neighbor to Christy's family, had known them for years and provided some useful information. She had met them shortly after they moved in and even helped care for the children when their mother was at work. According to the security officer, Christy had been at the supermarket around 6 p.m., where she bought a soda and a chocolate bar before leaving. There was nothing unusual about her visit. She was not accompanied by anyone, nor did anyone seem to follow her. Christy appeared cheerful as she left. Christy was supposed to return home with her shopping and had no intention of visiting anyone, which means she disappeared on her way back. What could have happened to her? Detectives interviewed several witnesses who confirmed seeing her with her shopping, and everything appeared to be normal. After that, no one saw Christy again. She had to walk quite a distance to get home. However, the locals knew that she often took a shortcut, and it seemed that she had taken that way. This shortcut involved a path through an area with trees and tall bushes. During the day, it felt quiet and safe, but it became unsettling after dark. Could someone dangerous have hidden there and kidnapped Christy? When the police learned about this path and went to investigate, it was 2 a.m. They searched but couldn't find anything useful. The search in the darkness seemed futile, so they decided to resume their efforts at dawn. When daylight came, detectives returned to search the route to the store. They quickly discovered a chocolate bar and soda that matched what Christie had bought. Nearby, they found a spot with trampled grass and broken bushes, indicating a struggle. It was clear why they hadn't found anything at night. Christie's body had been hidden in dense undergrowth, making it impossible to see in the poor lighting. Christie's mother, Sandra, took part in the search for her daughter and was among the first to discover her body. Shocked, she encountered the police officers at the scene. Her daughter's body showed signs of severe violence. There were stab wounds on her chest and neck, as well as many defensive injuries. Additionally, Christie had been abused. A major issue in the investigation was the lack of evidence. The killer had left no trace behind. Despite a detailed examination of the crime scene, nothing significant was discovered, suggesting that the perpetrator was an experienced criminal who knew how to cover their tracks. Christie wore a distinctive pearl ring that was missing. This ring was very valuable and had been a constant presence in her life. It was suspected that the killer took it. Detectives pursued this lead and visited local pawn shops, showing photos of the ring, but no one recognized it. They also reached out to the media and sought the public's help in identifying the jewelry, but no responses came in. The only piece of potentially useful evidence was the biological fluid found on Christie. However, at that time, forensic technology was not advanced enough to create a DNA profile for comparison. As a result, the collected materials were stored in archives. Detectives interviewed local residents and sought information from those who frequently used the nearby trail, hoping they might have seen or heard something. Unfortunately, no one could provide any useful information. Neighbors reported that they were near their homes around the time of the incident but did not hear anything unusual. It was suggested that Christie was attacked by someone she knew, which made her feel safe approaching him, leaving her with little chance to scream for help. Investigators spoke with Christie's mother, Sandra, to gather more details. They considered the possibility that she might have had issues with a boy who held a grudge, but this line of inquiry did not yield any substantial leads. She had no known romantic relationships, nor could any spurned admirers be identified. Detectives created a list of men and young individuals known for their abusive behavior who resided in the area. These individuals might have been present during the crime or had been released shortly before it occurred. Despite their efforts, the detectives made no progress. The collected evidence was filed away in an archive. The hope for a breakthrough lay in future advancements in technology and DNA research methods, suggesting that significant changes could be on the horizon. 3 years later, in 1988, new methods for DNA analysis and profiling emerged, enabling the comparison of collected materials with others. As a result, law enforcement was able to solve several cases that had previously stalled, including the murder of Christie Wesselman. However, when they compared the DNA profile obtained from the crime scene to the existing database, they found no matches, as the database was still small and didn't include all the DNA samples from convicted criminals. Since it was believed that the killer was familiar with Christie, authorities decided to collect DNA samples from her close neighbors in the suburban area. Many young men and women voluntarily cooperated, wanting to help solve the case. However, one local resident, Dana Henry, a 34-year-old man, refused to participate. He considered the investigation a waste of time and questioned the reliability of DNA profiling. Dana's refusal to cooperate raised suspicions about him, particularly because he lived near the location where Christie's body was discovered. Detectives tried to persuade him, but he remained resolute. Eventually, he agreed to voluntarily provide his DNA for profiling. Although he appeared to be a good family man, his actions shocked his neighbors, who could not connect his good image with the brutality of Christie's murder. Later, Dana spoke to the press and expressed frustration about being held in a cell as a suspect for 2 days. Law enforcement pressured him to provide DNA samples for examination, and he ultimately felt compelled to comply. Initially, the community believed that this would lead to a resolution of the case, but when the results came back, they showed no match. Dana was not a criminal. Throughout this ordeal, he maintained that he didn't want to provide his DNA because he believed he had the right to refuse. This situation drew more attention than Christie's murder itself. Dana began to seek justice, claiming that he suffered significant emotional distress due to the police's suspicions, which severely impacted his life. He endured days of hardship simply because he didn't want to cooperate with the authorities. After being cleared of suspicion, matters worsened. Upon returning home, his family, friends, and neighbors continued to suspect him of murder and abuse. Dana hired a lawyer, which cost him about $50,000, an enormous amount, especially since he struggled to keep up with his mortgage and was eventually evicted. This led to conflicts with his family and friends, although he eventually managed to convince them of his innocence after the police confirmed that he wasn't a criminal. Unfortunately, he lost almost all of his friends during this period. Part of the issue may have stemmed from the public's distrust of DNA analysis, as many people were unfamiliar with it. He filed a lawsuit against the police to seek compensation for the damages he suffered. However, his complaints were largely ignored. He was told that the situation could have been avoided if he had cooperated with the investigation from the start and provided his DNA like others did. Meanwhile, the investigation into Christie's death once again came to a standstill. In 1989, for years after Christie's murder, her family received a call from a man named Willis, whose identity was unknown to them. He claimed to know details about Christie's case from 1985. The family was hopeful about this information, but it led to no new developments. When they started to ignore him, he switched to sending letters. His behavior became increasingly obsessive, prompting Christie's mother to contact the police. Law enforcement investigated Willis's claims and discovered that he had been lying. Christie's mother then sought a restraining order against him. Once he was made aware of this restraining order, he ceased all contact. This situation added to the pain that Christie's family was already experiencing, as they had hoped he might be connected to the crime. Ultimately, it turned out that Willis had no involvement in Christie's murder. The next significant development occurred in 2000 when a database containing DNA information from registered criminals was already in place. This database was quite comprehensive. However, it primarily included individuals convicted of serious crimes, particularly focusing on those guilty of abuse and murder. Detectives were hopeful that this could help them solve the cold case, but unfortunately, no matches were found in the database, not even similar profiles. Investigators questioned how the brutal killer was able to attack Christie without leaving a trace, and whether he had committed similar crimes before. Such acts of extreme violence are rare, and those who commit them often reoffend. There was also a disturbing possibility that a serial killer was at work, a perpetrator who managed to evade capture and leave no evidence behind. If he is never caught, he could still be out there and pose a danger to others. The investigation once again hit a dead end, leading Christie's family to lose hope. It's heartbreaking to think that the mystery surrounding their daughter's death may never be solved. Progress finally came in 2015, 30 years after Christie's murder, when FBI agents contacted detectives in Illinois with a significant breakthrough. They reported a complete match with the criminal's DNA profile, which had been stored in the database in hopes of identifying the murderer. Authorities identified a 62-year-old man named Michael Jones. He was 32 in 1985, the year of the crime, and he had no connection to Christie or her family. They had never known him. Additionally, he did not reside in the city where the murder occurred at any time. Investigators sought a link between Michael and Christie but found none. He was unknown in the area, which indicated that the investigation had initially focused on Christie's immediate circle. If Michael had not committed another offense that led to his DNA being added to the database, he might never have been identified. Interestingly, he had previously been convicted of domestic violence, reported by his second wife. Although she suffered minor injuries, the incident did not seem serious enough for him to be flagged in the police database. This change became possible due to the efforts of the Illinois Attorney General, who has advocated since 2002 for the mandatory collection and storage of DNA profiles from all offenders, regardless of the crime's severity. The hard work of law enforcement ultimately led to the discovery of Christie's killer. Thanks to one person's initiative, Michael was uncovered as the perpetrator. Without this effort, he likely would have faced only a minor charge and continued living without facing consequences for the murder and abuse of a teenager. Michael had 2 ex-wives and several other relationships, prompting detectives to interview these women to gain insight into his character. They were cautious about charging him directly, but all the women reported that he had a problematic personality. A review of archived records revealed a long list of criminal offenses. His first major conviction dates back to the 1970s when he was arrested for assaulting a woman. However, the case was seemingly quieted down. A friend suggested that the victim may have been intimidated into retracting her complaint. This lack of accountability only encouraged further violence. A year later, Michael attacked another woman, who was his 27th target. He beat her severely, leaving her in critical condition. Fortunately, he eventually put her in her own car and abandoned her in the parking lot of a medical center, where she was found and received timely medical help. After her recovery, the victim promptly reported the incident to the police. As a result, Michael was declared a wanted man since he was nowhere to be found at his residence. The police began searching for Michael, but a few days later, he voluntarily turned himself in at the station. He could never explain why he had attacked, but he acknowledged that it was wrong. This may have been his way of attempting to lessen his guilt and potential punishment. He claimed he had mental health issues and needed assistance. He faced charges that could result in a prison sentence of 10 to 20 years. While incarcerated, Michael behaved well, became a model prisoner, and participated in treatment and rehabilitation programs. As a result, the parole board decided to release him after 6 years. In 1983, Michael was back on the streets of Illinois. Just 2 years later, he murdered Christie. If he had served the minimum sentence of at least 10 years that the prosecution had sought, she would never have encountered him. The woman who was attacked in 1977 was still alive in 2015 and met with the police. She was shocked to learn that Michael had been released early, as state law required that she be notified of his release due to the serious harm he had caused her. Unfortunately, she never received this notification. Had she been informed, she would have done everything in her power to oppose his early release, but the authorities did not provide her with that chance. Michael had moved away immediately after his release, so she had not seen him until that point. Now, she fully understood the danger he posed. The reasons behind the failure to notify her and why she was absent from the parole hearing remain unclear. A few months after his release in 1983, Michael married a young woman. She was already married with young children but quickly ended the relationship. When the police interviewed her, she revealed that Michael's behavior had driven her to leave. Her daughter reported that Michael had acted inappropriately while she was at work. Upon learning of this, the woman filed for divorce. Michael begged her not to go to the police, but she decided to report him. Fearing retaliation, she sought a restraining order, which provided her with some protection. Michael's next arrest occurred in 1999 after his girlfriend reported his inappropriate behavior. She regularly called the police due to domestic violence, but he only received a warning and a checkup without facing any consequences. In 2015, when the police arrested Michael, they met with him to discuss a matter but did not reveal the specific details. Michael remained calm and even joked with the officers, unaware that they were investigating the murder of Christie, for which they had a DNA match linking him to the crime. The police collected samples from him, claiming it was for another case, but their true aim was to confirm the DNA evidence. Throughout their interactions, Michael shared that he enjoyed riding motorcycles and often traveled far from his hometown. Investigators became suspicious that during his motorcycle trips, he might have passed through the suburbs where Christie lived. During one of these trips, it is possible that he noticed Christie walking alone, away from home. He might have followed her to the store and then ambushed her as she returned, attacking before she had a chance to react or scream. Tragically, she was beaten to death and abused. If the state attorney general hadn't initiated a new program to change the way DNA is collected, Christie's killer might have gone unpunished. When police uncovered the truth and charged Michael with Christie's murder, he was surprised but admitted his guilt, hoping for a lighter sentence through a plea bargain. Instead of facing life in prison, Michael was sentenced to 80 years, meaning his term will end in 2095. This is ironic because he was 64 at the time of his conviction, making it unlikely that he will live to see 144. Despite this sentencing, Christie's family had already accepted that they might never know what truly happened to their daughter. In the courtroom, Christie's mother, brother, and sister were visibly emotional. They shared with the jury that the most painful moments for them were the weddings and births that followed Christie's death. Although these events should have been fun, they turned bitter because Christie was no longer there to share the joy with them. Among those attending the trial was Dana Henry, who was still reeling from the fallout of being wrongfully accused. He wanted to confront the man who had committed the brutal crime for which he had been blamed. Dana maintained that his life had been ruined and blamed the justice system for Christie's murder, demanding compensation. He felt deeply aggrieved that he had never even received an apology from the authorities who had subjected him to harsh treatment in a cell. The only physical reminder of Christie that remained with her family was a piece of her communion dress, which her sister wore as a wedding brooch. She stated that she would never forget Christie and would always keep her memory alive. Today, we will talk about a crime that became famous in the state of Tennessee, USA. Its victim became a household name, and an urban legend was formed about her. For many years, this story has been used to warn children. However, in reality, this story is full of lies and raises many questions. In February 1964, Paula Herring was 18 years old. The girl was a good student who had just entered the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Life seemed to be just beginning for her. Paula had been very athletic and had played basketball for many years. This not only made her strong physically but also mentally. These qualities helped her withstand the strong blows of fate. She had lost her father 3 years earlier. Paula had always been a daddy's girl, so her father's death was shocking. Her mother, Eva Herring, a widow, immersed herself in her work as a nurse and willingly formed numerous acquaintances with men. It seemed that she was not particularly affected by her husband's death. Paula sought solace in her loved ones, growing closer to her 6-year-old brother, Alan. The child did not understand what was happening and needed care. They often spent little time at home while their mother worked and went on regular dates. Their relationship was strained, and Paula planned to leave home as soon as an opportunity arose. The campus of the University of Tennessee turned out to be the best option to create distance. Paula and her mother communicated little, but Eva frequently asked for her daughter's help to watch Alan while she went out on dates. On Saturday, February 22, 1964, Eva left home with 2 men at around 7 p.m. and again asked Paula to babysit her younger brother. All of this happened despite Paula's plans to meet friends and go to a basketball game. She was forced to stay with her brother. She intended to put him to bed and read a book she had borrowed from a friend. At around 11 p.m., Eva returned home with 2 men. Eva immediately noticed that the front door was unlocked and felt anxious. Upon entering, they found Paula lying face down in a pool of her own blood. Her white shirt was stained with blood, and she showed no signs of life. It was clear that she had been brutally beaten and strangled. The probable cause of death was shots fired in her back, hitting her directly in the heart. The skirt of Paula was pulled up, suggesting abuse. While one of two friends rushed to call emergency services, Eva checked her daughter's pulse and, feeling faint from the sight, ran outside to catch her breath. Meanwhile, the men did not return to the house, opting instead to flee the crime scene. Eva realized that it was too late to help her daughter, but quickly regained her composure when she remembered that her son Alan was not with her. Fortunately, the boy was found in the next room, merely sleeping. When he heard the adults screaming, he came out to investigate. He explained that he and his sister had been watching TV that evening, then he went to bed early. Before that, he noticed his sister received a phone call while sitting in the living room. The next morning, news of the crime spread rapidly and appeared on the front pages of newspapers. The community was shocked, especially given the context of the corruption in America at that time. Her death was linked to a series of abuses of vagrancy recorded in the area in the previous months. However, the local residents believed that the crimes were committed at a much higher level. They were convinced that someone from a criminal contingent was taking advantage of the authorities' powerlessness, leading to increased murders. Consequently, citizens pressured law enforcement agencies to act. By Sunday morning, news of Paula's murder had made headlines. On Monday, a witness arrived at the station to report that a man named John Clark had bragged at a bar on the night of the murder that he intended to go to Eva's house, asserting that he would confront Eva if she answered his call. He planned to bring 6 cans of beer and stated he would wait for Eva if Paula did not join him. Thus, the police had a prime suspect. John Clark, nicknamed Red because of the color of his hair, was the son of a judge who was also the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. John was considered the black sheep of the family. His other siblings had achieved great success in life. Some worked for the CIA, some had built careers in the army, and others were involved in real estate. In contrast, John had been unemployed for the past year and a half. Many considered him a drunk and a loser. That same week, on Thursday, the mayor appeared on television during an official press conference, stating that the police were tracking the main suspect in the murder. However, he had not yet been arrested because there was no irrefutable evidence against him. Within an hour, the situation changed. After a meeting involving the prosecutor's office, detectives, and municipal representatives, suspicions were confirmed. By Friday morning, it was decided that there was enough evidence against the main suspect, and a warrant was issued for the arrest of John for first-degree murder and also for abuse. Following the trial, John Clark was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. It may seem that the investigation proceeded too quickly, and indeed, this was the case. The incident involving Paula had become highly publicized, and authorities wanted to resolve it as swiftly as possible. After several decades, the armed forces finally began to ask key questions regarding a case that had seemingly been ignored at the time of the crime. However, it took more than 50 years to get closer to a solution. An impromptu investigation led a man named Michael Bishop to write a book about Paula's death, highlighting the story of how John Clark may have been framed. Bishop became interested in historical crimes committed in Nashville, an area so corrupt that there was more than enough material for investigation. Together with a friend, he started a project to catalog these interesting cases. He obtained a box of documents dated from the 1960s, which contained several folders labeled Paula Herring. He was amazed to find photographs from the sensational case that the police had conducted in those distant years, including crime scene photos and forensic reports from the morgue. The information indicated that Paula was the victim of a brutal murder, suffering from 3 gunshot wounds and 4 blunt force traumas to the head. She had been subjected to prolonged beating, numerous defensive abrasions and bruises were found. Additionally, there were signs of strangulation on her neck. However, court documents only recorded 2 gunshot wounds. In this box, there was a note from Mr. Beverly Briley, who was actively involved in the case for reasons that appeared to stem from compassion, though the truth proved to be much more trivial. The processes and methods that the mayor used raised serious questions. Everything looked as if the interests of influential people were involved in this case. Michael began to delve into the circumstances of this tangled case. The closer he got to it, the more it resembled a web of lies. As it turned out, the then Mayor Beverly Briley was not just passively involved in the investigation of this crime, he played a significant role. It took time to understand his involvement. From the very beginning, he built his career on deception, starting with lies about his educational background, extending to his marital status and the existence of adult children, which he misrepresented to the Supreme Court. In truth, he was a notorious womanizer. Furthermore, rumors surrounded him regarding illegal substance use. These rumors arose because he periodically went to the hospital secretly, likely to deal with the effects of his systematic banned substance use without attracting media attention. While in a private clinic, he met 3 nurses. Gradually, these 3 women found themselves in an exclusive group they called the Drinking Club, which also included at least 2 detectives, the mayor, an assistant district attorney, and a sheriff. The exact number of members in this organization remained unknown, but it was clear that there were many more participants. They regularly met and used illegal substances. This is why Paula's mother and her friends became members of this organization. The nurses could obtain prescription drugs. However, there was immediate suspicion that this entire group might have been connected to the crime. Even Eva's interrogations raised questions. She doesn't give any direct answers. And one important point is that Paula was found after reading a book. Strangely enough, the book disappeared. But why would anyone take the book? Even more questions arose when Michael tried to understand why Paula had ended up in the house in Nashville that weekend. She was studying in college and lived on campus. In fact, she had an invitation from her boyfriend to go skiing, and her new friends from the sorority had invited her to a basketball game, where she was supposed to play the role of the team captain. It was strange that she chose to visit her mother, who essentially did not care about her. Even the request to babysit her brother, Alan, seemed odd, as the neighbors knew perfectly well that Eva was not particularly worried about him. She never used the services of a nanny. Most often, she simply left her son unattended for many hours, probably heading to her privileged club. Several witnesses described in detail the relationship between mother and daughter. All of them knew that it was strained. Eva's interrogations lasted about 6 hours, during which she provided very contradictory information. She left the police office on Saturday morning. By Monday, a witness came to the station and told the detectives about John Clark, the same person who allegedly went to Eva's house with beer and was supposed to have been the last to see Paula alive. In fact, the story of this witness was questionable. He was a guy from a wealthy family, unemployed, spent most of his time in pool clubs and bars. He had a dubious reputation as a habitual liar with addictions. Despite the doubts surrounding his story, he confirmed that John Clark owned a .32 caliber pistol, which matched the murder weapon. By around 6 p.m. on Monday, detectives arrived at John's location. He agreed to come in for questioning and even asked who could take him back home. Obviously, he did not consider the possibility of arrest. John had a reputation for drinking, but like many others involved in this story, he had good connections thanks to his father. John didn't really work anywhere. His family was supported by his wife, who worked as a school teacher. John was interrogated all night, and there were more than a few interrogators present. When asked to provide samples from under his fingernails to test for gunpowder, he refused, as he did with the polygraph test. He only agreed to a full-body search. Not a single scratch or bruise was found on him. In 1966, no DNA tests existed, making it impossible to identify the skin particles found under the victim's fingernails. John confirmed that he owned a .32 caliber pistol, but it had been either stolen or lost 10 days before he visited the police station. He claimed he didn't go to Eva's house that evening. Instead, he went to several bars from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., then returned home around 9:30 p.m. His wife confirmed he was home at that time. The police drove from the suspect's house to the crime scene, with travel time estimated between 14 and 24 minutes, depending on the route. According to the official conclusion, Paula was killed between 10 p.m. and 10:30 p.m., meaning John could have committed the crime. However, it was impossible to obtain a confession from the suspect, and there was no physical evidence linking John to the crime. The witness's story began to fall apart. The next morning, the witness received a call informing him that his story was not corroborated and that he would not receive a reward. He then presented new details to confirm his claims. He talked about a party where John's friends had challenged him to prove he had the guts to use a gun. John, a tipsy man, pulled out a gun and shot into the ground in front of the house. The witness provided an exact location, and they were able to recover the bullet. By coincidence, a book was also found in a ditch that Paula was supposed to have been reading on the night of the murder. It was strange that before this, dozens of law enforcement officers had failed to find it even on John's property. John admitted that the same morning he took his dark suit to the dry cleaners. When examined, experts found wool fibers identical to those on the floor where Paula was murdered. However, there was no blood on the clothes. An expert who later testified at the trial argued that it would take more than mere contact to transfer these fibers from the victim's clothes to John's suit. There had to be close, prolonged contact. Just a few hours after the bullet was sent for ballistics analysis, results confirmed it matched the bullets found at the crime scene. Yet, the law enforcement response was not straightforward. Originally, the bullet had not been found, but it was located the following morning in plain sight, raising suspicions that it had been planted. Neighbors recalled hearing a car quickly drive away from the crime scene, making a clanking sound. The book found in the ditch had no fingerprints at all, and even Michael herself expressed surprise at the speed of the tests, which took just a few hours along with the shipping of items. Such speed was simply stunning for the 1960s. At the pre-trial hearing, John's lawyer managed to get the abuse charge dropped because the medical examiner's report refuted it. They also succeeded in changing the venue, moving the trial to Jackson, Tennessee. The trial was scheduled for September, but before that period arrived, many events transpired, particularly involving several high-ranking police officers implicated in bribery, illegal activities related to selling in banned strip clubs and gambling halls. This likely reached even higher echelons of power, as the district attorney eventually refused to participate in some cases, including Paula's. These were handed over to his assistants, who were discovered to be members of the mayor's exclusive club. Both insisted on the death penalty for the defendant, but this was eventually canceled. John was facing only life imprisonment. The judge decided that the trial would take 5 days. This decision seems strange given that the whole case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. Not only were fingerprints missing, but even the murder weapon was absent. Some of the material evidence used by the prosecution seemed to have no relation to what happened during the case. The jury was isolated to prevent them from accessing information about the case from the outside. In fact, the judge, prosecutor, and lawyers seemed to be on the same team from the very beginning, so even the most absurd decisions met with no resistance. Naturally, under these circumstances, John had no chance. It was later discovered that the prosecutor was Eva Herring's former lover, and it turned out that her lawyer was also her lover. Interestingly, when John was summoned, he admitted that he had slept with Eva days before the murder of her daughter. John clearly remembered coming to his mistress's house with a gun. But he later forgot about the gun because he had been drinking that evening and simply forgot what happened. One day, Eva's husband was found dead. Curiously, shortly before these events, a life insurance policy had been issued. After receiving money for it, Eva bought a house where, 3 years later, her own daughter died. Since John was also her lover, it was obvious that she had dirt on him. The most controversial point was the number of gunshot wounds. Paula was actually wounded 3 times, 2 bullets that were discussed passed through her. One of them were found under her body on the floor, while the 3rd wound may not have been mentioned because it did not penetrate. and the bullet remained in her body. It was revealed that Paula's autopsy was not performed. In fact, the forensic experts stated that it was unnecessary since it was obvious she died from a couple of gunshot wounds that pierced her heart. However, it seemed that the autopsy was never conducted because the bullet found in her body could point to the real culprit of the crime and justify John. Strangely, Eva discovers her husband has died in similarly unclear circumstances, and his death is ruled to end one's own life due to a prescription drug overdose. Now it looked even more suspicious. Weren't there too many coincidences that one woman had two people die in her family under strange circumstances? According to Eva's confession, her husband left a suicide note, but for some reason, it was not mentioned anywhere. Eva claimed that she lost it. She stated that her husband had become depressed due to losing his job. She also suggested that the nurse had simpler access to prescription drugs than her husband, which means Eva could have poisoned him, involving the highest echelons of power. Members of Eva's drinking club gathered, and naturally, this information did not appear at the trial. According to everyone more acquainted with the circumstances of the crime, Eva and her accomplices should have been in the dock in John's place, both for the murder of her daughter and for her husband's voluntary departure from life. After 5 days, as decided in advance, the hearings ended, and the jury went to deliberate the verdict. As expected, they found John Clark guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. At that moment, the defendant lost consciousness and came to a few moments later, asking what had happened. Several appeals followed, and after the next one was filed, the same lawyer represented John. Despite his dissolute lifestyle and drunkenness, John himself seemed to be the most decent person among all the defendants in the case. Probably out of guilt, his lawyer became the only person from the entire group who was tormented by his conscience. Thanks to good renovation, John served only 9 years out of the required 30. His sentence was given in 1975, and he was released on parole. Later, he died insisting on his innocence. In January 1979, a series of pardons was initiated by the new mayor. He released 52 civil servants who had been jailed after numerous high-profile trials, including 20 convicted of murder. Subsequently, all these individuals became members of various political parties, and some even became FBI agents. During this period, the mayor himself was under investigation, particularly after an incident in 1977 when he fired a female chair of the council for refusing to release prisoners suspected of bribing officials. It was later revealed that the woman had been correct in her suspicions, but no action was taken against the mayor. He was eventually convicted of fraud, extortion for the purpose of selling liquor licenses, which led to a series of charges and scandalous convictions affecting police officers and high-ranking officials in Nashville. Among those implicated were exclusively addicts, corrupt officials, and criminals. A private club was uncovered, where nurses were found to have stolen prescription drugs from the hospital. Eva was fired from a private clinic due to her addiction to substances. The circumstances surrounding her daughter's death remain a mystery, as well as the voluntary departure of her husband from her life, are unknown. The participants and organizers took their secrets to the grave. More than half a century later, this history has been carefully concealed, and in Michael's book, most of the people who reported valuable information are listed as anonymous. They were still wary of the powerful individuals at the time of its writing, as many officials believed to be connected to this crime were still alive. Among Michael's informants were witnesses who provided detailed accounts of Eva. The informant said that Eva was raised in a Texas brothel, learned early on to use body as a means to influence people and obtain what she needed, including money, power. Notably, a few days before Paula's murder, Eva acquired 2 burial plots. According to the official conclusion, Paula was killed between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m., while her mother and her companions found her at 11 p.m. Her mother could not have known about her daughter's death at the time of purchasing the plots, leading to questions about whether it was mere coincidence. As far as is known, Paula was studying to be a lawyer. due to a strained relationship with her mother, likely decided to expose her criminal activity. Paul suspected Eva might be involved in her father's death and collected incriminating evidence against her. Paul was aware of many unsavory details regarding influential people that could jeopardize her life. However, this is only one of the possible assumptions. The author of the book, Michael Bishop, himself is not entirely convinced of John Clark's innocence, as some evidence still points to him. After the investigation concluded, Eva returned to Texas with her son. Eva died in Texas at the age of 52, and her death certificate indicated a heart attack. However, those who knew her believed that her demise was related to alcoholism and substance abuse. 5 years later, the mayor of Briley died, and Eva's son Alan outlived them all. Alan often wondered why his father's suicide note was never found, what happened to his sister. Paula still lies in a lonely grave, with an empty plot of land beside her. Some believe that the second plot next to Paula was meant to be the final resting place for Alan, but something went wrong that night, and he survived. This case generated a lot of publicity, leading Eva Herring to involve her powerful lovers in the investigation, including the mayor, who found a convenient suspect in John Clark. However, this is merely a theory that can never be confirmed or refuted. The Paula Herring case remains one of Tennessee's most haunting mysteries, its legacy etched in an urban legend urging children to lock their doors. While John Clark's conviction appeared to close the chapter, Michael Bishop's investigation decades later exposed troubling gaps in the evidence, suggesting a rush to judgment possibly tainted by corruption. The truth about Paula's death, Eva's role, and the shadowy figures allegedly involved may never fully emerge, leaving only questions and a lingering sense of justice unserved. Paula's story endures as a cautionary tale, not just of crime, but of how lies and power can obscure the pursuit of truth. There are individuals who should not be made fun of, as this can be dangerous for life. This is what happened in today's story. Todd Kohlhepp was born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, USA, on March 7, 1971. When he was only 2 years old, his parents decided to divorce. He stayed to live with his mother. Sometime later, his mother remarried. However, his relationship with his stepfather also developed very poorly. Todd always faced significant social difficulties. He could not fully communicate with his peers and other people. He viewed everyone he met as a potential rival. Even in kindergarten, he constantly argued with other children, frequently fought, and broke their belongings. Todd behaved aggressively in any situation, as if he were unable to control his emotions, including anger. At home, he was also unfriendly. From an early age, Todd began exhibiting a history of cruelty to animals. He killed a goldfish using bleach and shot a dog with an air rifle. His sadistic behavior became deeply ingrained in him. Even in his early school years, his mother moved to South Carolina with her new husband. She decided to divorce him in 1982. The very next year, she began a relationship with another man and married him. Todd was 12 years old at the time. Despite his young age, he became a source of conflict in the house almost daily. He was so uncontrollable, aggressive that his mother and stepfather feared for their lives. They placed him in a psychiatric clinic. However, this did not help much. Todd expressed dissatisfaction with living in South Carolina, stating that he wanted to move to live with his biological father, with whom he had not communicated or seen since the divorce. His father lived in Arizona. Perhaps Todd thought that moving would allow him to start anew and have a fresh perspective on life. After moving to Tempe, Arizona, it quickly became apparent that there would be no improvement in his behavior. His biological father described him as a person capable of feeling only anger. He also repeatedly ended up in psychiatric treatment. Despite all efforts, the situation only worsened. In November 1986, Todd's first serious crime. At that time, he was only 15 years old. One Saturday, he went outside and met a 14-year-old neighbor named Christy Granado. He tricked her, kidnapped her, then took her to his father's house, where he taped her mouth shut, tied her up, put a gun to her head, and abused her. The attack was unprovoked. He had barely communicated with the victim before, only exchanging greetings when they accidentally saw one another. After the attack, he threatened to kill Christy, shoot her siblings, and her entire family if she told anyone. Todd scared her so much that she genuinely wanted to remain silent. His cruel and manipulative personality was already formed by then. He was so confident in his own importance that he believed he could get away with any crime. Christy had no idea that her family was already worried and actively searching for her. Shortly before the attack, her parents had taught their children how to behave in an emergency. Christy's younger brother became worried when he couldn't find her at home and called the police. Fortunately, Todd released his victim. She returned home just as her brother was speaking with the patrol. Christy was forced to tell them what had happened. Todd Kohlhepp was arrested. From the very beginning, he showed absolutely no concern for his victim. He was only interested in how long he would go to prison. The lawyer defending him claimed that his client would not harm others in the future and that he had simply made a mistake. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. During this time, he radically changed his behavior. His cruel nature was almost not evident. He was a model prisoner, but in reality, he was simply skillfully hiding his inner struggles and innate cruelty. In August 2001, Todd was released at the age of 30. He didn't waste his time in prison. He went to college to study computer technology. After his release from prison, he decided to return to South Carolina because he wanted to be with his mother. Now she can't refuse. While incarcerated, he seemed to have taken the path of correction and decided to reintegrate into society. To do this, he needed to find a decent job. However, he still struggled to get along with others and found it difficult to work in a team, so he decided to pursue freelance work, changing jobs frequently, mainly as a designer. 5 years after his release, in 2006, he applied for a real estate license in South Carolina. In response to this request, they informed him that they could not provide a license because he was registered as a criminal prone to abuse assault. It seemed that he had no chance to start his own business. However, he learned to hide his cruel nature very well. He became cunning and strategic. Todd scheduled a personal meeting to explain his situation in detail, downplaying the extent of his previous cruelty. He attributed everything to a simple misunderstanding with his girlfriend and his age, explaining that everything happened by mutual consent but that the girl was simply offended by him and decided to teach him a lesson. That was why he was put in prison. His plan worked. This lie allowed him to convince the licensing agency that it was merely a misunderstanding and that he wanted a second chance. By June 2006, Todd received a real estate agent's license. A criminal with a criminal record opened his own business and continued to lead the life of a respected model citizen who was simply deceived in his youth. His business developed and brought in a good income. Todd became wealthy and successful. Interestingly, at the same time, he became a passionate collector of weapons, acquiring many pistols and rifles. By his own admission, he inherited this passion from his father, who also collected such items. This interest was consistent with Todd's other hobbies. He loved everything that evoked associations with strength and power. He even obtained a pilot's license. He was fond of motorcycles and fast cars. Outwardly, he appeared to be a successful person with a very charismatic and strong character. Todd was not the only successful person in the city. In November 2003, 30-year-old Scott Ponder opened a motorcycle dealership, assisted in this business by his 52-year-old mother, Beverly Guy, who worked alongside him. Scott, like Todd, had a passion for this type of transport, and this business became a dream come true for him. He was running a thriving enterprise. Todd often dropped in to admire the bikes and bought several. Scott's bride, Melissa, moved in with him in 2002. They got married in January 2003, and in November of that year, his wife found out she was pregnant. They were about to have their first child and seemed like a happy couple going through the best period of their lives. However, the Ponders had no idea how dramatically everything could change in just a few days. On November 6, 2003, Scott and his wife, as usual, went to his dealership. His wife dropped him off in the parking lot. They made eye contact as she drove by, and Scott blew her a kiss. Melissa headed to the medical center for her first ultrasound. It was such an important and exciting event for her, but her husband Scott was unable to accompany her, although he hoped to see and hear his baby's heartbeat. Melissa waited for her husband to return home to tell her how everything went and what the doctor said. But instead, at 3 p.m., Melissa received a call from an employee of the center, who reported the news of a shooting at the bike shop. Melissa was on the other side of town but dropped everything and rushed there. There was a lot of commotion at the scene. About 10 police cars had gathered, the road was blocked, and they wouldn't let Melissa's in, even when she told them her husband Scott was there. Within a couple of minutes of arriving, Melissa was informed that her husband had been shot during a robbery at the dealership. She didn't understand what was happening and wanted to contact her husband's mother, who was also working that day. It turned out that Beverly had also been attacked. A total of 4 people died in the massacre. The third victim was 29-year-old Brian Lucas, and the fourth had not yet been identified at the time of Melissa's arrival. It was later discovered that he was a 26-year-old mechanic named Chris Sherbert who worked at the dealership. All the victims were attacked in cold blood at point-blank range, but the identity of the killer remained unknown at that time. In that moment, Melissa's world collapsed. She was left without the support of her husband and his mother. The family business was also under threat. Despite all the difficulties that had befallen Melissa, she managed to pull herself together and cope with the challenges. 7 months later, in June 2004, Melissa gave birth to a boy whom she named Scott Jr. in honor of her deceased husband. All this time, she desperately wanted to know who had taken her loving husband from her and their child. Law enforcement officers continued to investigate the high-profile murders. Based on the degree of cruelty, it was believed that the perpetrator must have known the victims personally and had a strong motive, but there were no specific suspects. Detectives analyzed connections in the business of relatives and friends of the victims, but the likely perpetrator could not be identified. Nothing was stolen from the shop, and all witnesses to the crime were murdered. The cameras at the dealership were not working that day. Finally, towards the end of 2004, unexpected progress was made. Melissa was called to the station, expecting detectives to report that they knew the perpetrator's name. Instead, she found herself in an interrogation room. Detectives explained that she had accidentally left her son Scott Jr.'s diaper at the dealership a few months earlier. The police compared the boy's DNA with the materials found at the crime scene, and it turned out that they did not match the samples of her deceased husband. This led to the assumption that Melissa had given birth to a child not from her husband but from her lover, which meant she had a motive to get rid of him. Melissa was so stunned by the fact that she had gone from being a victim to the main suspect that she even offered to exhume her husband's body. She was convinced that only he could be the father of their child, and this should prove her innocence. Melissa was so convincing that the police decided to check everything again. It turned out that they had indeed made a mistake. The test tubes with the materials from Scott and Brian, whose DNA was collected at the motorcycle shop, had been incorrectly labeled, so the results did not match. Melissa's son was, in fact, Scott's. Although the police admitted their mistake, the damage to Melissa's reputation was enormous. The local community closely followed the events surrounding the bloody massacre at the motorcycle shop. Many eagerly picked up on new rumors regarding Melissa's alleged lover, and gossip quickly spread throughout the area. People began to look askance at her, whisper about her supposed infidelities. Everyone avoided her and her son. All of this finally broke Melissa's spirit. Melissa did not want this to affect her child's relationships with other children in kindergarten and school. When she became a suspect, caused serious damage to her reputation. Now, she decided that the only way to start all over again was to return to her small homeland. Meanwhile, the detectives again found themselves at a dead end. There was no suspect in the shooting, and the crime remained unsolved for over a decade. It was believed that the attack on the center could have been carried out by a disgruntled employee or client who simply vented his anger in such an extreme way. However, none of the employees were prone to conflicts. Scott created a very comfortable environment there. They could not find any suspicious disgruntled clients. It was simply impossible to understand the motive of the attacker. During this period, Todd, on the contrary, flourished. He honed his skills, crafted his career, and became one of the best real estate agents in Spartanburg, South Carolina. This continued until 2015. Now, the 44-year-old realtor had purchased a huge plot of land in Woodruff. It seemed that he was going to build a solid house, which is why he bought such a large plot. After the purchase, he ordered local hunters to stay away from his land. He truly intended to radically transform this place, but not quite in the way many imagined. On December 22, 2015, 29-year-old Johnny Joe Coxey and his 25-year-old wife, Megan Lee McCraw Coxey, were reported missing. They were a newlywed couple who, unlike other successful individuals in this story, had experienced many problems. In the past, both had suffered from addiction to illegal substances. They had a child who was taken away by social services. Law enforcement officers searched the troubled couple, but to no avail. Even an analysis of their mobile phones did not yield any results. It was probable that their means of communication were not working, and they had practically no relatives or close friends who would care about them. Therefore, the missing persons report was received quite late. No one particularly pressured the police to look for them. There were no volunteers to form search teams for Johnny and Megan. The police had few resources, so the search was very sluggish. There were no leads. The investigation reached a dead end, and everyone calmed down. They simply stopped looking for them. On September 4, 2016, a police officer, the father of the Carver family, called the station and reported that his 32-year-old son, Charles David Carver, was missing. He had a great relationship with his son. They communicated daily using phone calls and instant messengers. As a rule, they talked about their lives and sports. The last message that he received from his son was about football. The silence lasted too long. The complete lack of activity from his son was very alarming because this had never happened before. The Carvers tried to find out the fate of Charles, but it turned out that he was not the only one missing. His new girlfriend, named Carla Brown, had also disappeared. Just 5 days after meeting for the first time at Walmart, both went missing. They were not dependent people and had no problems. A spontaneous escape was ruled out as it would have been pointless. The police began checking the mobile phone data of Charles and Carla. At the end of August, Charles and Carla had been contacted by a realtor. He was familiar with Charles and communicated with him periodically through pages on social networks. Before that, he had already offered work on his site. This time, he did the same. However, there were no more leads. Initially, this contact was simply discarded, but the days of searching turned into weeks. No information about the young couple appeared, so more thorough checks began. This was largely due to the activity of the families of the missing couple. Until October 2016, it seemed like another dead end. Finally, detectives analyzed the location data from the mobile phones of Charles and Carla. It turned out that the last time they were active was not far from Todd's territory, where he had invited they to work, making the situation appear suspicious. So, 2 months after the disappearances of Charles and Carla, On November 3, 2016, the police went to Todd's property. One group went to his house, which was located on one part of his large plot of land, while the second group quickly located a metal storage container standing alone in a remote area, which was not visible from the road. Its green color blended with the foliage, rendering the container inconspicuous. After listening, the officers realized that someone alive was inside the container. It took a considerable amount of time to open all the locks and cut the chains blocking the entrance. When law enforcement officers finally entered the container, they found Kala chained inside, exhausted, emaciated, but alive. Charles was not visible. She quickly explained that he had died long ago. According to her, when Todd offered her and her boyfriend a part-time job then brought them to his property, he attacked them as soon as they got out of the car. He attacked Charles 3 times in the chest, and Charles died instantly. Todd then chained Kala and left her in the container, where she spent 2 months. When Todd was informed that a captive had been found on his land, he feigned surprise and tried to deny everything. However, this was futile because the victim of his torture detailed that it was he who had attacked them. Kala Brown was rescued after 65 days in captivity. She said that Todd abused her twice a day. He was very cruel, often torturing and treating her like his possession. Kala endured all this because she was afraid to resist, simply hoped that they were looking for her and would soon find her, as happened. Kala was sure that if she had resisted, she would have been killed just like her boyfriend. Inspecting the area around the container, the police discovered 3 shallow graves. In one was Charles's body, and in the other 2 were additional bodies, all of whom were dressed. Kala had no idea about the other victims. Only an analysis of dental records confirmed that these were Megan and Johnny, who had disappeared a year ago. They could not find a motive for the kidnappings and torture, as there was no connection between the victims. They did not even know each other. Only the criminal himself could solve this mystery. Todd Kohlhepp was arrested and put behind bars. During the very first interrogation, law enforcement officers tried to extract details of the crimes committed and get him to confess. It turned out that Todd genuinely wanted to cooperate with the authorities, but instead of discussing the bodies and the living girl found on his land, he began to recount a different story. With genuine pride, Todd told the story of a shooting that had occurred 13 years ago. He admitted that he loved motorcycles and often stopped by the dealership where Scott worked with his family. Scott had come to know him well due to his frequent visits. Todd bought a motorcycle there, which he later disliked, and began to consider other options for motorcycles for a long time. Eventually, he decided to return his motorcycle, but Scott refused to take it back and even laughed at him, which greatly angered Todd. Although he did not show his anger, resentment was building inside him. At some point, he decided to visit the shop to take revenge. On November 6, 2003, he went to the showroom as usual, walked between the rows of motorcycles, waiting until no customers were left. Then, he pulled out a gun and began attacking the employees in cold blood. The last ones were Brian and Scott, who managed to react and tried to run, but Todd's bullets caught up with them right outside the front door. After this, Todd was able to escape, which made him feel invincible, exacerbating the situation. He was thirsty for blood, and new crimes were only a matter of time. When discussing the attacking in the motorcycle store, he showed no signs of regret. On the contrary, he appeared proud of his actions. Like many serial criminals, he wanted to impress others. For him, the murders became a way to seek attention. After all these revelations, detectives contacted Melissa, Scott's widow. After 13 years, they finally managed to understand what had happened at the family dealership and who was behind the attacking. Most of all, she was struck by the impotence of the authorities, as the detectives had even tried to accuse her at one point but could not take action until blood was spilled again. If the police had not visited Todd's land in search of Charles and his girlfriend, the shooting case might never have been revealed. During interrogations, Todd cannot be silenced. He began to describe with pleasure the details of other crimes, including the murder of newlyweds. The last place where Johnny and Megan saw each other alive was on Todd's property. He also offered them work on the site. Naturally, they experiencing financial difficulties, eagerly accepted. Todd did not deal with them immediately. Instead, he lowered their guard by offering them simple work for good pay. He simply took advantage of the situation so they would do more work on the site. However, after their first encounter with him, they was doomed. Initially, he scrutinized them and quickly realized they were the ideal victims that no one would search for. As it turned out, on December 19, 2015, Todd, who had already built trust, invited they back to his property to clear away some rubble. He personally took them and drove to a distant part of his land. As soon as they both got out of the car, the first thing he did was attack Johnny. Johnny died instantly, leaving his wife in shock, waiting for her own fate. However, Todd did not want to kill her immediately, just as he had with Kala. There was a large metal container used as a mobile warehouse on the property. Now it had become a torture chamber for Megan. She spent about a week there, repeatedly trying to escape, even setting fires to it. He admitted that she behaved like a wild animal trapped in a cage, creating too many problems, prompting him to get rid of her. He attacked her in cold blood in the back of the head. Unlike her, Kala proved to be obedient, which ultimately saved her life. Next to the container, which served as an improvised prison, was already Johnny's grave. He dug another hole in which he buried Megan. After that, he returned to his work as a real estate agent and acted as if nothing had happened, all while searching for a new victim for his torture. Following Todd's confessions, the list of his crimes included at least 7 murders and the kidnapping. Naturally, investigations and trials for all incidents would require significant time and resources. Therefore, Todd was offered life in prison instead of the death penalty if he formally pleaded guilty to all charges. Todd accepted the offer. On May 26, 2017, Todd Kohlhepp pleaded guilty to 7 counts of murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of abuse assault. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. In July 2019, the victims of Todd's crimes participated in civil and wrongful death hearings aiming to receive compensation from the company owned by Todd. Kala described in detail her experience in that ill-fated container, recounting the constant violence and pain she endured. While Kala shared her story, Todd listened attentively without showing any emotion. She did not take her eyes off him. This was a significant moment of revelation for her. After Kala finished telling her story, Todd's lawyer asked how much compensation she wanted, but she could not name a specific figure. She didn't care about that. Her main goal was to see the criminal, look him in the eye, and overcome her fears. Kala understood that no amount of money could bring back the lives lost or restore the 2 months of freedom that were stolen from her through torture. Following this, there were hearings initiated by the family of Scott Ponder. His widow, Melissa, also described in detail the pain she experienced due to her husband's death, including what it was like to raise their son without a father. The most powerful moment in this process occurred when the child, who had just turned 13, bravely walked past the killer, looked him straight in the eyes, and said that he forgave him. Melissa was proud of her son, believing that if his father had survived, he would have definitely appreciated such an act. The child demonstrated an extraordinary strength and maturity for his age. In August 2020, Todd's property was sold at auction, and the proceeds were transferred to the families of the victims. The story of the serial killer did not end there. Since then, he has repeatedly claimed that there were more victims, mentioning at least 2 additional murders. However, he has consistently avoided providing details. The identities of these possible victims and their bodies have not yet been found. The investigation remains ongoing. Police believe that he may have used his job as a realtor to gain access to people, breaking into their homes to commit crimes. However, there has been no confirmation of these theories. Acquaintances described Todd in various ways. One client who sold him a house remembered him as an extremely sociable person and a professional in his field, although he often talked about firearms and flirted with her. Another employee described Todd as hot-tempered and aggressive, unable to control himself. A colleague noted that he frequently watched adult films even while at work. It was reported that he often visited a restaurant where he pestered waitresses. It turned out that one of his victims, Megan, worked at that establishment. This may have been how he met her. Todd posted disturbing reviews on a marketplace. For instance, in a review of a folding shovel, he advised keeping it in the car in case one needed to bury bodies and had forgotten the regular shovel at home. In another review, he mentioned a knife, stating that he hadn't stabbed anyone with it yet but hoped to do so with such a high-quality tool. In a review of a padlock, he wrote, "Reliable locks. There should be 5 of them on the container to protect against escape." These reviews sounded ominous at the time, but no one paid attention to them. Throughout this period, not only Todd was accused, but also his friend, Dustin Lawson, who was considered an accomplice. Despite knowing Todd's criminal background, from 2012 to 2016, Lawson purchased at least 12 guns and 5 silencers for him. As it turned out, it was thanks to Lawson that a substantial collection of firearms was amassed, which was used for the murders. In 2018, Lawson pleaded guilty to 36 charges related to these transactions and received a total sentence of 8 years and 3 months in prison. Dustin Lawson was released on November 13, 2023, while Todd Kohlhepp remains behind bars and is not expected to be released. Alina Shikhet was born in Ivanovo, Russia, and moved to the USA with her family when she was just 3 years old. From a young age, she exhibited remarkable talent and had a deep passion for singing, dancing, and acting. Her beauty and talent attracted the attention of many. Her journey in the performing arts began at the age of 4 at a European rhythmic gymnastics school. By the time she turned 5, she was already performing solo at competitions outside her home state. During her elementary school years, she attended the Tali Dance School, where she quickly took on leading roles in various dance performances. With her extraordinary talent, Alina mastered many dance styles and techniques that took other children years to learn. She often performed alongside older, more experienced dancers. In 5th grade, Alina joined Dindy Studio, where she explored various dance styles such as hip-hop, jazz, and ballet. In celebration of her Russian heritage, she even portrayed a prima ballerina. She participated in competitions at Stage New York, including Broadway, where she consistently won awards for her outstanding performances. She showcased her skills at numerous local events in Pittsburgh, taking part in celebrations such as Up Night, parades, Christmas events, and gatherings in Robinson, Taunton, and nearby areas. Thanks to the confidence Alina gained from dancing, she also discovered her talent for singing, captivating listeners with her beautiful interpretations of famous songs, whether she was performing on stage or for her family at home. When Alina was 14 years old, she sustained a severe knee injury during a ballet class and had to undergo complex surgery. After months of physical therapy, she received the devastating news that she could no longer dance in competitions or for enjoyment. Despite this setback, she remained resolute and refused to give up on her determination to return to the stage. She became involved in musical theater, allowing her to continue pursuing her passion for dance. She excelled as a talented actress, dancer, vocalist, and comedian, receiving tears, smiles, and loud applause for her performances. Alina also sang in the school choir and performed at various city events, always bringing joy to those who watched her. Although her injury prevented her from building a career in dance and the performing arts, it inspired her to pursue a medical career. She aspired to become a doctor or physical therapist, wanting to help others recover from injuries that hinder their dreams. Alina graduated from Montu in 2015 and spent her first 2 years of college at the University of Pittsburgh in Greensburg. She was part of a community focused on outdoor activities and service, even serving as the vice president of the organization. During the spring semester of 2017, she enjoyed participating in events that benefited children and animals. Alina later transferred to the main campus in Pittsburgh with the goal of becoming a physical therapist. She lives in a house with other students and goes to bed one night after sending her friend, Zach Brandner, the pictures they had just taken. This was her last message. The following morning, Alina's parents, Belly and Yen, arrived to pick her up for a walk in the park and to attend a charity event supporting breast cancer awareness. Ellie rang the doorbell and asked Zach if Alina was awake, as she had not answered their calls. Her father, Yen, was still in the car with their dog when her mother, Ellie, began knocking on the door of the room. When no one answered, she continued knocking for about 5 minutes, progressively becoming more forceful. As fear set in, she started shaking the door. Meanwhile, the dog barked incessantly. Ellie called Yen into the house before kicking down the door. At that moment, Zach was on the stairs and could only hear screams. Yen rushed upstairs and peeked into the room, where he found Alina lying with her arms stretched out and half her face unrecognizable. It was hard to comprehend what had happened, as she was in a pool of her own blood. Zach dialed for an ambulance, and the siren shattered the morning silence, serving as a reminder that someone's life was in danger. When the ambulance arrived, the doctors hurried inside. Ellie met them at the door, trembling and tearful. She led them to the room where her daughter lay on the floor. Sadly, the doctors had to confirm Alina's death. The police cordoned off the house as part of their investigation. Police Chief Scott Schubert reported that an expert determined Alina's death was a homicide, resulting from both blunt force and acute trauma to the head. Authorities had already identified a suspect in the case, Alina's ex-boyfriend, 21-year-old Matthew Darby. Alina and Matthew met while she was studying at the University of Pittsburgh in Greensburg. After their breakup in 2015 to 2016, Alina informed the police that Matthew had illegally entered her home on September 20th. She filed a report detailing how he had climbed a drain pipe to reach the second floor and broken into her house through a window. Matthew's actions were prompted by Alina ending their relationship and not responding to his calls. In her report, Alina described a previous incident of violence, stating that he had grabbed her, pushed her, insulted her, exhibited jealousy, and attempted to control her. Alina's father, Yen, noted that he and his wife, Belly, had attended court with their daughter the week prior to obtain a protection order against Matthew in connection with this case. Matthew was arrested for trespassing and released on a $10,000 bail on September 26th. In an interview, Alina's roommate, Zach, expressed ongoing concerns about Alina and Matthew's relationship. He recalled an incident from the previous month when Matthew yelled at Alina outside their window. Zach mentioned that this was just one of many unpredictable outbursts from Matthew. He noted that Matthew even monitored Alina's social media activity. If she liked a photo of another guy on Instagram, Matthew would react very aggressively. Matthew had access to Alina's social media accounts and would go in to remove likes from her posts because he knew her passwords. This behavior occurred before their breakup, but afterward, Alina changed all her passwords. Matthew also prohibited her from wearing clothes that he deemed too revealing. After their breakup, Alina blocked his number. However, on September 20th, after their breakup, he broke into her home. Zach stated that he heard glass breaking outside at around 12:30 a.m. He sent a message in their home chat and didn't think much of it. Shortly after, he heard a loud crash and a scream from upstairs. It was Alina crying for help because Matthew was in her room. Alina's phone was not found when her apartment was later searched, but records indicate she did not answer multiple calls from a number that was identified as Matthew's between 4:15 and 4:55 a.m. that Sunday. According to police, The last known location of Alina's phone was near the intersection of A76 and Route 30, close to Irvine. A driver reported to police that he had taken Matthew to the intersection of Seal Street and Ward Street in Oakland. Matthew exited the vehicle and asked the driver to wait for 10 minutes. After that time, he requested another 10 minutes. When he asked to wait longer, the driver finally left because he could not wait any longer. Investigators later found surveillance footage of Matthew disposing of items in a manhole near Seal Street, not far from Alina's home. Pittsburgh Police Homicide Detective Edward Fair reported that he and other officers discovered 2 knives and a hammer in the same manhole cover. Hair and skin were found attached to one of the knives. Based on this evidence, police obtained a warrant for the arrest of Matthew Darby. He faces charges of murder, trespassing, attempting to evade capture, theft, and possession of a weapon used in a crime. He was apprehended in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, after a concerned citizen reported seeing him attempt to break into a window of a house. When the police arrived, they found a man who matched Matthew's description and confirmed his identity. He received additional charges for providing false information to the police in a public place. Each of these charges carries a potential fine and up to 30 days in jail. During a court hearing in South Carolina, Matthew's bail was denied, with the judge labeling him a potential flight risk. The judge informed Matthew of his right to an extradition hearing. When given the option, he chose to consult with his lawyer first. He also declined to testify about the South Carolina charges without legal representation. Alina's friends, many of whom are students at the University of Pittsburgh, attended the court session alongside her family. They brought signs to raise awareness about domestic violence and advocated for Alina's Law, a bill in the state legislature aimed at allowing judges to mandate electronic monitoring of high-risk domestic abusers. The judge confirmed all charges against Matthew, which include murder, attempted escape, trespassing, theft, and possession of a weapon for criminal use. Prosecutors provided evidence that Matthew was on the Duquesne University campus during the night of October 7th to 8th, where he was seen by University police officer Raymond Mao. Matthew inquired about directions to the Briar Hall dorms. Surveillance footage showed him in various locations on campus, including the student union, where a police officer permitted him to enter to charge his phone. Officer Raymond Mao observed that he seemed anxious and had a slight scent of alcohol. One photograph presented by prosecutors shows a man identified as Matthew wearing a striped Rush shirt with the Miller Beer logo while in a campus elevator. This shirt was found among Matthew's belongings when he was arrested a few days later. Prosecutors indicated that evidence released on January 19, 2018, shows Matthew in a Duquesne University elevator hours before he was said to be at his home in Oakland. However, Matthew's attorney, David Schrager, challenged this assertion, claiming the video does not clearly show that it was Matthew. Later, around 4 a.m., Matthew ordered an Uber that took him from his Briar Hall dorm to a street near his home, suggesting that someone else could have accessed Matthew's account. He fled the Pittsburgh area but was apprehended by police in Myrtle Beach 3 days later. Pittsburgh police discovered 2 knives in a manhole in Oakland, which they collected as evidence. Matthew is accused of discarding the knives after leaving Alina's home, where police claim he attacked her to death. Matthew's attorney, David Schrager, noted that the evidence presented at the preliminary hearing was weak and that he was not surprised by the outcome. Prosecutors announced their intention to pursue the death penalty for Matthew, citing that he had violated a protection order requested by Alina. Additionally, Alina had previously testified against Matthew, who has a history of violent crimes and threats. To avoid the death penalty, Matthew agreed to plead guilty to first-degree murder, which carries an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. Alina was a vibrant student aspiring to become a physical therapist. Ellie, Alina's mother, confronted Matthew, asking if her daughter's death made him happy and expressing her belief that he had failed. During the court proceedings, Matthew, wearing a red prison jumpsuit and a long-sleeve white shirt, only answered the judge's questions directly. When asked why he pleaded guilty, he stated that it was because he was guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a mandatory sentence for first-degree murder, and he also admitted guilt to charges of burglary, trespassing, and possession of an instrument of crime linked to Alina's murder. In a related case regarding the break-in at Alina's apartment 2 weeks before the murder, Matthew also pleaded guilty. A year later, Matthew, now with a new lawyer named Joseph Hudak, filed an appeal, arguing that his previous attorney had provided inadequate legal representation. He claimed that his previous attorney did not conduct a thorough risk analysis or properly explain the situation to him. In response, District Attorney Allegheny's office stated that Matthew's claims were likely to fail but acknowledged that a hearing might be necessary. Their decision was influenced by a principle known as the coordinating jurisdiction rule, which prevents judges in the same district from overturning each other's rulings. Matthew's lawyer, Joseph Hudak, viewed this as the first step toward overturning Matthew's life sentence. Matthew is actively seeking to be released from prison, but so far, all his attempts have been unsuccessful. He is currently serving a life sentence. Although Alina's family deeply feels her loss, they take pride in her enduring legacy and the positivity she brought to the world. In the face of their tragedy, they channeled their grief into a greater purpose. Alongside friends and community activists, they established a foundation in her name to support victims of domestic violence. The Alina Sheikhette Foundation aims to help young women nationwide access the support and protection they need when facing abuse, while also advocating for laws that safeguard victims. The foundation organizes workshops and educational initiatives to create safe spaces for those in fear to seek help. It collaborates with law enforcement and legal professionals to devise innovative protection methods for domestic violence victims, including electronic bracelets for offenders and mandatory notifications for breaches of protection orders. Additionally, they host annual charity events and marathons to fundraise for victims. Alina's legacy extends beyond her passing. She left a mark on this world that will save lives and contribute to positive change. Imagine sending your child to school, only to receive their lifeless body the next day. The culprit seems to be protected. This was the reality for Kendrick Johnson's family. From the discovery of his body in a gym mat to the shocking revelation of his missing organs during his exhumation, this case is as horrific as it gets. Every detail raises many unanswered questions. Kendrick Johnson was born in October 1995 to Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson. As the youngest of his siblings, he was the heart of his family, the light that filled their home. His mother described him as the joy of their lives, a boy with an easy smile and natural charm. He was fiercely athletic, a rising star in both football and basketball. Science and math came easily to him, as he had a gift for numbers. Above all, Kendrick had big, unstoppable dreams of making it as a professional football player. However, on January 11, 2013, those dreams were silenced forever. 17-year-old Kendrick was discovered in a way no one could have imagined. His lifeless body was clamped inside a rolled-up wrestling mat in the gymnasium of Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia. The Lowndes County Sheriff's Office ruled his death an accident, claiming Kendrick had fallen inside the mat while reaching for a pair of sneakers. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation conducted an autopsy and concluded that his death was due to positional asphyxia. He had suffocated while trapped upside down. But his parents, Jacqueline and Kenneth Johnson, knew better. Something was wrong. Then the horrifying details began to emerge. On January 9, 2013, the first day back at school after the Christmas break, the students of Lowndes High School settled into their routine. The school had two gymnasiums, an old one and a newer, larger one. In the dim, dusty corner of the old gym stood several large wrestling mats that were rolled tightly and stacked upright. Some students, including Kendrick, stored personal belongings inside the mats to avoid paying locker fees. However, over the break, more mats had been added, altering the arrangement. Lowndes High School followed a block schedule, meaning classes alternated on different days. On Thursday, January 10th, at exactly 1:30 p.m., Grainy surveillance footage captured Kendrick walking into the old gym. However, he was never seen leaving. His next class was weightlifting, but he never arrived. Hours passed, the hallways emptied, and the school day ended. He was supposed to come home after a freshman basketball game that evening, but he never did. Calls to his phone rang endlessly into silence. As midnight approached, Jacqueline, his mother, could feel it in her bones. Something was terribly wrong. So, just like any mother would do, she reported him missing. The next morning, January 11th, Jacqueline arrived at the school, her heart pounding with dread. She pleaded with administrators, who printed missing person flyers. Time stretched unbearably thin. Then, at approximately 10:30 a.m. inside the old gym, a group of female students sat on top of the wrestling mats filling out surveys. Something caught their attention, a pair of socks barely visible, peeking out from one of the rolled-up mats. One girl laughed, thinking it was a prank, but curiosity got the better of her. She climbed onto the bleachers, peered down into the mat, and what she saw sent ice through her veins, a body. The laughter stopped, and her scream broke the stillness of the gym. A male student rushed over, his hands trembling as he tried to pull Kendrick out. The moment he touched the body, he recoiled in horror. The stench of decomposition hit like a wave. It was clear that something terrible had happened here. A teacher sprinted forward, and together they knocked the mat over. Kendrick's body slumped forward, his face unrecognizable, grotesquely swollen. The school was thrown into chaos. Administrators initiated a lockdown and directed students to the new gym, distancing them from the alarming situation in the old gym. Amid the turmoil, Jacqueline received devastating news. Her son Kendrick's body had been discovered. He had been alone for 21 hours, suffering in the darkness. However, it is clear that someone knows what truly happened. Shortly after Kendrick was discovered, authorities in Lowndes County quickly questioned every student who had been in the gym at that time. Their accounts were consistent. A video recorded the scene, capturing the disturbing stillness of the gym, blood pooling around Kendrick's head. And two shoes, one next to his feet and the other underneath him. Yet several aspects seemed strange. Kendrick's socks were partly pulled off, and his body was positioned in a way that didn't make sense. The Johnson family rejected the conclusion that their son's death was accidental and sought support from civil rights organizations. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the NAACP became involved. Protests took place, and Kendrick's parents were even arrested for civil disobedience outside the courthouse. The case gained significant attention, as the family believed it was a cover-up. In response to growing public pressure, the Department of Justice launched its own investigation, but that too hit dead ends. One story says that Kendrick was familiar with the old gym at Lowndes High School. Like many other students, he used the rolled-up wrestling mats for storage, hiding his pair of sneakers inside to avoid paying locker fees. This was a routine he had followed many times. On January 10, 2013, surveillance cameras recorded Kendrick walking into the gym alone. No one followed him, and no one witnessed what happened next. However, based on the physical evidence, investigators believe that Kendrick's last moments were marked by a tragic chain of errors. At 5 feet 10 inches, he reached for the mat that contained his shoes, only to find that it had been moved over the holiday break and was now stuck behind several other mats. The space was just out of reach for him. Instead of tipping the mat over, a loud action that might attract attention, he likely decided to climb inside, as he had done on previous occasions. Kendrick gripped the side of the mat with his right hand and lowered himself headfirst, reaching out with his left to grab his shoe inside. However, as he went deeper, there wasn't enough room for him to bend his elbow and pull himself back up. He began to panic as his muscles strained. Eventually, he lost his grip on the mat's edge and slid further down, becoming fully inverted. His shoulders got stuck against the walls of the mat, trapping him. The more he struggled, the harder it became to move due to gravity working against him. He tried to shift his weight and may have attempted to kick himself free, but in the process, he lost the shoes he was wearing. They fell near his feet. Blood rushed to his head, the world around him darkened, and his lungs were compressed under his own weight, leading to a drop in oxygen levels. Trapped and helpless, he suffocated in silence, alone in a gym filled, just out of reach of help. Kendrick remained in the mat unnoticed for nearly 21 hours. No one questioned his absence until his mother reported him missing. By then, it was too late. When he was discovered the next morning, rigor mortis had already set in. The cause of death was ruled as accidental positional asphyxia, a tragic mistake that became fatal. Positional asphyxia is a hidden and dangerous condition. It occurs when a person's body gets stuck in a position that makes it hard to breathe, leading to suffocation. Unlike the typical struggle associated with choking, positional asphyxia results in a slow and painful death. The victim might not realize they are in trouble until it's too late. This usually happens when someone cannot escape from a cramped space, such as being trapped between furniture, stuck in a vehicle, or, as in Kendrick's case, when the body is twisted in a way that compresses the chest or limits lung expansion, breathing becomes shallow, oxygen levels drop, and the person may lose consciousness. If help does not arrive soon enough, death is certain. Medical reports from other cases of positional asphyxia show similar patterns. Victims are often found in awkward positions, with signs of suffocation such as blood coming from the mouth and nose, skin discoloration, and fluid in the lungs. What is particularly chilling about these deaths is how easily they can be misinterpreted. In Kendrick's case, it is a fact that he was discovered upside down in a gym mat. However, his family believes the official account is flawed. Since the time of his discovery, the Johnsons have maintained that Kendrick did not climb into the mat by himself, did not fall, and did not suffocate accidentally. He was murdered. Their pursuit of the truth has uncovered a complex cover-up that, even years later, continues to obscure the reality of what happened. From the beginning, there were clear inconsistencies in the case. One major issue was the handling of the investigation. The coroner, responsible for overseeing the body and crime scene, wasn't called for almost 6 hours, which violates Georgia law. By the time he arrived, the gym was no longer secured, meaning any evidence present had likely been tampered with. When Lowndes County authorities quickly declared Kendrick's death an accident, it was surprising. The medical examiner from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation attributed the cause of death to positional asphyxia, ruling out any foul play. The placement of Kendrick's body also raised suspicions. His arms were in unnatural positions, one above his head and the other bent at his side. If he had truly been reaching for his shoes, both arms would have been pointed downwards. The way the gym mats were stacked made it nearly impossible for him to have accidentally fallen into them. Furthermore, if he had somehow climbed inside, how did his shoes end up neatly on top of his legs instead of underneath him? There were also concerning traces of blood, a streak on a nearby wall and a pool beneath his head. However, authorities never tested the blood, dismissing it as old and unrelated to the case. Additionally, there were issues concerning his organs that warranted further examination. Months later, Kendrick's parents faced the difficult decision of exhuming his body to conduct an independent autopsy, driven by their need for answers that they believed had been withheld from them. Upon examination, they discovered something horrifying. His internal organs were missing and had been replaced with newspapers. Officials later claimed this was a standard practice due to decomposition, but it only fueled the family's suspicions. While the Georgia Bureau of Investigation had previously classified Kendrick's death as an accident caused by positional asphyxia, the new autopsy suggested a much more violent cause. It indicated clear signs of blunt force trauma to the neck, suggesting that Kendrick had not simply suffocated but had been struck hard enough to cause his death. Two different autopsies led to two completely different conclusions. Which one was accurate? GBI claims organs were returned to body but discarded by funeral home due to decomposition. What was most unsettling was the delay in notifying the Johnson family about their son's death. Kendrick's body was found in the morning, but his family was informed much later. As they sought answers, law enforcement remained unresponsive, offering only vague explanations. Kendrick's parents were certain about who was responsible for their son's death. They rejected the idea that it was an accident and believed he had been murdered. They filed a lawsuit naming two brothers, Brian and Brandon Bell, who also attended Lowndes High School. Brian has a history of provoking and attacking Kendrick at school. The Johnsons claimed that one of the brothers lured Kendrick to the gym, where he was viciously attacked. They suggested that the motive was a conflict over a girl. However, the Bell family denied any wrongdoing. School records indicated that one brother was out of town the day Kendrick was last seen, while the other was in a different part of the school. Authorities considered this evidence strong enough to establish the brothers' alibis, but the Johnsons remained skeptical and believed the evidence had been tampered with to protect the Bell family. The accusations continued to escalate. Some answers might have been hidden in the surveillance footage from the cameras positioned in Lowndes High School's old gym, the location where Kendrick Johnson was found dead. However, that crucial information was missing. Forensic video analysts examined the school's surveillance videos and uncovered troubling findings. As examined the video files more closely, they uncovered increasingly troubling findings. Some recordings were corrupted and could not be played, while others were processed incorrectly, resulting in significant image loss. A total of 1 hour and 5 minutes of footage was missing from 2 cameras in the gym, including Kendrick's last moments. Additionally, 2 other cameras had an even larger amount of time missing, an alarming 2 hours and 10 minutes. Then, at exactly 1:09 p.m., the footage resumes, showing Kendrick entering the gym. However, the most essential evidence in the case is completely missing. To make matters worse, it was discovered that the timestamps on the cameras were inconsistent. The cameras within the gym seemed to be operating 10 minutes ahead of those outside, leading to a disjointed timeline that could easily be manipulated. A camera outside the gym captured something significant. During the hour of missing footage, many students entered the gym. Did they witness anything? Were they questioned, or were they involved in something that needed to be concealed? What should have been a clear and undeniable record of Kendrick's last moments had instead become an empty digital space. The situation was that law enforcement did not take control of the video system right away. Instead, they relied on the school's IT department to choose which footage to share. Unfortunately, this is precisely what occurred. A school employee, not an investigator, accessed the footage and provided it to the police 5 days after Kendrick's body was discovered. By that time, the footage could have been altered, deleted, or replaced. Somewhere within those missing minutes, corrupted files, and altered timestamps lies the truth about Kendrick's case. If that truth was recorded, someone ensured it would remain hidden from view. However, experts countered that a systemic error explained the anomaly and that the SCLC found no cover-up. There was no conclusive evidence to support the intervention. Why were so many leads overlooked? Why did the Bells seem untouchable? The Johnson family believed this was due to the father's influential connections. As the Johnsons sought answers, law enforcement insisted that Kendrick's death was an accident. When the family accused the sheriff's office and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation of mishandling the case, officials rejected their claims as unfounded. Nevertheless, unsettling information continued to emerge. A coroner's report criticized the investigation for being poorly managed and pointed out that Kendrick's body had been moved before authorities arrived. In 2015, determined to find the truth, the Johnsons filed a lawsuit against the Bell brothers and over 30 other defendants, including law enforcement officers, school officials, and medical examiners. They claimed that the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office staged the crime scene and placed Kendrick's body inside a mat to simulate an accident. However, their case struggled due to the absence of eyewitnesses, concrete evidence, and confessions. Despite this, many questions remained. Investigators stood firm, with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation dismissing any homicide claims based on a regional crime lab report that found no significant injuries on Kendrick's body. In November 2015, the Justice Department filed a motion in the civil case to intervene and stay the case. The U.S. Attorney said that allowing discovery to continue in the civil case would have a disincentive effect on the federal investigation, which had expanded to include possible obstruction and jury tampering. After the Justice Department's motion was dismissed, Johnson's parents dismissed their own wrongful death lawsuit, saying they hoped to refile after the federal investigation was concluded. They were subsequently sued for more than $850,000 in attorney's fees and $1 million in defamation damages. Johnson's family requested a second exhumation of his body and was granted permission by Valdosta city officials. On June 22, 2018, Johnson's body was exhumed. In June 2018, Kendrick Johnson's body was exhumed for a third autopsy, conducted by Dr. William R. Anderson at Forensic Dimensions in Orlando, Florida. The examination concluded that Kendrick's death resulted from non-accidental blunt force trauma to the right neck and chest, suggesting he was struck with significant force, contradicting the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's positional asphyxia ruling. The report noted hemorrhaging and soft tissue damage inconsistent with accidental suffocation, reinforcing the second autopsy's findings of murder. Despite some organs still missing, as observed in 2013, no new conclusions address this issue. The Johnson family views this as further evidence of foul play. On March 10, 2021, the case was officially reopened by Lowndes County Sheriff Ashley Polk. Polk offered a $500,000 reward of his own money for information leading to the conviction of whoever killed Kendrick Johnson. According to Polk, he and two other investigators studied the case for 13 months before reaching their conclusion. In January 2022, the second investigation concluded with no charges filed. Polk announced a conclusion that there was no murder, no cover-up, no conspiracy in the teenager's January 2013 death. It was simply a tragic and bizarre accident. Polk stated that he would not claim that there was anything wrong with the original investigation or that the original investigation's conclusion of an accidental death was wrong. The sheriff also stated that he was not treating the case as a homicide. He further stated that the two brothers, who were named in previous legal actions by the Johnsons, were not suspects. The Johnson family has spent nearly 10 years seeking answers, filing lawsuits, organizing protests, and highlighting the corruption they believe exists in Valdosta, Georgia. Kendrick's father, Kenneth, expressed their frustration. In their quest for truth, they have exhumed Kendrick's body twice, hoping to find new evidence. Despite spending thousands of dollars to uncover the truth, every time they make progress, the case seems to regress. Although the Justice Department initiated a federal investigation, the results were never disclosed, and the courts dismissed important lawsuits for lack of evidence. Meanwhile, the media and the community have moved on, but Kendrick's parents continue to fight, convinced that their son was murdered and that the truth is being concealed. What really happened? Was it a tragic accident or a hidden murder? To this day, no one has clear answers, neither those who have been following the case nor Kendrick Johnson's family. Years have gone by, yet the truth is still out of reach, obscured by missing video footage, inconsistent reports, and hints of a cover-up. Justice remains elusive, and the silence surrounding Kendrick's death. Will Kendrick Johnson's family ever receive the answers they seek, or will the truth remain buried forever? In February 2025, the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit revived the Johnson family's legal battle by ordering a Georgia federal court to reconsider the dismissal of their 2023 lawsuit against the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and others. The district court, led by Judge Lee Martin May, had dismissed the case, arguing that entities like the Sheriff's Office and School Board were not suable and that claims against individuals lacked specificity. The appeals panel upheld May's refusal to recuse herself but ruled that the Johnsons could amend their complaint to name proper defendants, such as individual officials or districts, potentially correcting legal errors. This decision, while not guaranteeing success, offers the Johnsons a renewed chance to seek accountability for Kendrick's death, alleging a conspiracy to conceal the truth. The case now returns to the U.S. Northern District of Georgia for further review, keeping the family's pursuit of justice alive. Sarah grew up in Florida in a family with 7 children. She dedicated her life to teaching elementary school and, inspired by her upbringing, wanted to build a strong family of her own. Sarah was naturally sociable and cheerful. In 1981, she met her first husband on a beach in Atlanta, and they decided to move to Georgia together. He owned a fitness club, and Sarah worked as an aerobics instructor at his center. Unfortunately, their relationship faced challenges due to his infidelity, which led Sarah to file for divorce. Although Sarah's first marriage was unsuccessful, she still hopes and is determined to find a partner who shares her values about life and family. At the age of 31, in 1984, she saw Fred Tokars, a prosecutor, discussing a high-profile case on TV. At that time, Sarah was thriving as a marketing director, and she was so taken by his interview that she felt he was the one for her. Confidently, Sarah reached out to Fred, and they quickly clicked, becoming inseparable. Fred was captivated by Sarah's beauty and charm, and she soon wanted to start a family with him. They discovered many similarities between themselves, and Sarah felt that he embodied her father's qualities and her aspirations. Fred often described himself as a protector against evil, making life feel calm and secure. They married a year after they met, and shortly thereafter, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. Their first son, Ricky, was born, and Sarah initially continued working before becoming a full-time homemaker. 2 years later, their second son, Mike, was born. To accommodate their growing family, they purchased a large home in an upscale neighborhood. Fred established his own law practice and began teaching accounting and tax law at a law school. At this point, their sons Ricky and Mike were 4 and 6 years old. At first glance, the Tokars family appeared to be a typical, quiet household, until an incident unfolded in 1992. Sarah, a 39-year-old housewife, was actively involved in her children's education and attended church every Sunday. In November 1992, Sarah took her sons to visit family for Thanksgiving while her husband, Fred, had to work. They traveled to Bradenton, Florida, stopping in Tampa to pick Fred up from the airport, as he was scheduled to join them for a family gathering that weekend. Unfortunately, their return home took a tragic turn. On the evening of November 29, 1992, a man answered a knock at his door to find 2 young boys covered in something red. When they explained that their mother had been attacked, he found it hard to believe them. The older boy, 6-year-old Ricky, recounted the terrible events to the man and later to the police who arrived on the scene. The boys, Ricky and Mike, who are 4, had just come home with Sarah after a holiday visit. As they entered their dark house, they encountered an unfamiliar man with a weapon. He ordered them to return to the car and forced Sarah to drive, while the boys sat in the back and he sat in the front passenger seat. He threatened them and demanded that they leave town. Frightened, Sarah drove where the criminal directed, pleading with him to let her and the children go. She offered money and proposed giving him the car, but he ignored all her pleas. After they left the city, he ordered her to stop. Terrified, she refused to exit the car, and a struggle ensued during which the intruder attacked her in the head. Meanwhile, Mike had been sleeping and was unaware of the situation. The sound of the gunshot woke him, and he began to cry out of fear. According to Ricky, after attacking Sarah, the intruder simply got out of the car and left. The boys then sought help in the unfamiliar area, knocking on the door of a nearby man who called for assistance. Ricky recalled details about their mother's killer and provided a description to the investigators: a dark-skinned man in jeans, a sweatshirt, and a cap. Detectives went to the car where the crime had taken place, as described by Ricky. Unfortunately, the child's account proved accurate. The interior of the car was covered in blood, and there was vomit, belonging to the children, due to the horrific sight of their mother's murder. They were so traumatized that they vomited multiple times. However, when examining the car, no shell casings or useful evidence were found. The detectives decided to investigate the family home from which the attacker had taken Sarah and the boys. They noted that the front door to the main part of the house had been tampered with, and the security alarm was found to be off, despite signs of a break-in. However, some details didn't add up, raising suspicions that the crime scene might have been staged rather than simply motivated by burglary. Investigators quickly shifted their focus to Sarah's immediate family and proposed an initial theory. Fred Tokars, a lawyer, was suspected of being connected to his wife's murder. However, this was just one theory among many and did not yet have any supporting evidence. At the time of the incident, Fred was in Montgomery, Alabama, for a business trip. He hurried back to his hometown to be with his children and support them during this challenging time. He also agreed to talk with investigators. Initially, Fred did not raise any suspicions with the authorities. When he first heard about the incident, he was distraught, mumbling and sobbing on the phone, which made it hard for others to understand him. At the police station, he displayed similar grief, appearing visibly upset. He cooperated fully, assuring the police that he would do everything possible to help catch the culprit. He also agreed to show detectives around the house to point out any missing items or inconsistencies. The investigation led them to the basement, where Fred's home office and a safe were located. Fred reported that the safe in his home should have contained $1,000, but the money was now missing. He mentioned that only his wife, Sarah, knew the combination to the safe, which was well hidden in the house. Besides Fred and Sarah, no one else knew its location. He expressed uncertainty about whether the safe had been tampered with, speculating that Sarah might have taken the money for her own needs. Despite his willingness to help, the police found it odd that Fred seemed unaware of various details about his own house. For instance, he couldn't explain why the handle on the door between the garage and the main living areas was installed upside down. Fred justified this by saying he spent most of his time working or traveling for business, so he might not have been informed if Sarah made any changes or hired contractors. There was little concrete evidence to counter Fred's story. He appeared to be honest and cooperative, which did not raise immediate suspicions. Investigators then spoke with neighbors on the street. Several witnesses reported seeing a stranger, a black man, in the area shortly before the abduction, which aligned with the description given by 6-year-old Ricky. However, this information only confirmed what the child had said and did not lead to any new developments. The police interviewed Sarah's family, who provided important information. Sarah had been visiting her relatives when she received a call at 1:30 a.m. about a security alarm going off at her home. Another alarm went off at 7:30 a.m. After speaking with neighbors, who assured her everything appeared fine, she instructed the security company to turn off the alarm, thinking it was a malfunction. She and her children planned to leave her relative's house the next day around noon for a lengthy 9-hour drive home. Interestingly, on the same day, Fred called Sarah's father to inquire about their return. According to her father, Sarah and the children were expected home between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. She had promised to call her parents once they arrived, but by 11 p.m., there was still no call. When the tragic news emerged, some people found Fred's reaction to be excessive and peculiar. He was constantly crying and expressing a desire to see his mother, Norma, and even after she arrived, he could not be comforted. Many felt that someone like Fred, a respected lawyer and former prosecutor, could not possibly be involved in a crime. However, Sarah's sisters told the police a different story, one that changed the positive perception of him. They described Fred as having difficulty maintaining a good relationship with Sarah. He was often absent and not a good father. According to them, Sarah raised the children mainly on her own, and the family rarely ate dinner together. Although Fred often claimed to be working late, Sarah sometimes overheard women laughing in the background during his calls, leading her to suspect he was having an affair. Sarah's sisters shared that they felt Sarah's relationship with Fred began to decline after the birth of their first child. Sarah wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, but Fred insisted she keep working to help with household finances. He only permitted her to remain at home after her workplace closed down. The sisters didn't just visit the police station to tell stories. They revealed that about 3 years before Sarah's death, she had been gathering information about Fred. She shared this information with her younger sister, focusing on his financial dealings, as she grew increasingly worried about his new clients after he switched to private law practice. Sarah began to notice that Fred's relationships with clients seemed too personal. She suspected that he could be involved in crime and might cover up activities of trafficking prohibited substances in exchange for cash. From that point on, she no longer viewed Fred as a positive influence. He appeared to align himself with crime. After she left her job, he strictly controlled their finances, giving her only $400 a week for bills, groceries, and family needs. If something broke, Sarah had to ask for extra money, which Fred often denied, leaving repairs undone. Over time, their once beautiful home began to fall into disrepair because Fred refused to spend money on maintenance. Furthermore, she is not allowed access to her bank account and must ask Fred for permission for any spending. He tracks every penny she spends. Once a fashion lover who enjoyed looking good, she can now only wear her sister's second-hand clothes. Additionally, Fred prohibited her from going to his home office in the basement. He concealed his income and insisted they were financially struggling, despite Sarah's suspicions that this wasn't true. However, he didn't restrict his own spending. When it came to visiting his family in Florida, Sarah had to plead for a long time to get money for gas or hotel stays. Sometimes, Fred would allow her to visit her family but would refuse to go with her and their children, opting to fly separately while claiming he was too busy. 3 years before her death, Sarah's sisters revealed that she started contemplating divorce. She drafted and notarized a will for her sons, canceling all previous versions. She transferred her property to her children and designated her younger sister, Karen, as their official guardian if anything happened to her. Concerned about her son's future, Sarah believed that Fred was not fit to be a father and was unsuited for family life. In the time leading up to her death, Sarah reached out to a divorce lawyer to discuss Fred's instances of physical abuse. She confided in her sisters about the worsening situation. One day, after a violent incident where Fred had beaten her, she declined to meet with the lawyer because she didn't want to be seen in public with visible bruises. Then, someone else came along, Ralph Poma, a private investigator. Sarah wanted Ralph to gather evidence against Fred to help her win her case. She believed that Fred had threatened to take custody of their children if she divorced him, and his threat seemed credible, especially given his connections to law enforcement, the prosecutor's office, and the courts. At one point, Sarah took Ralph to Fred's office and asked him to retrieve files from Fred's computer to assist her case. However, Ralph declined, stating that obtaining that information would be illegal. During his investigation, Ralph learned that Fred had been involved in a brief affair with an unidentified woman, possibly a stripper. This woman later spoke to investigators and mentioned that Fred often rambled while drunk, expressing that his wife had become a significant problem and hinting that he wanted to get her out of the way. Although he did not provide specifics, this indicates that he might have had a motive to harm his wife, Sarah. Despite these findings, there was no direct evidence linking Fred to Sarah's murder. After a second round of questioning, the police released him due to a lack of concrete proof for charges. Nonetheless, he remained a primary suspect because of his apparent motive and opportunity. His skills as a lawyer, along with a competent defense attorney, allowed him to effectively evade police questioning. More evidence was deemed necessary. Fortunately, uncovering additional information was relatively straightforward. It was discovered that shortly before Sarah's death, Fred had taken out life insurance policies on both himself and Sarah, totaling nearly $1.7 million. This detail contributed to the circumstantial evidence against him, but it still wasn't enough to definitively connect him to the crime. Furthermore, according to the main prosecution witness, Ricky, the perpetrator had dark skin, while Fred had a lighter complexion. This inconsistency raised questions, though it remained possible that Fred used a disguise or hired someone to carry out the murder and mislead investigators. Investigators decided to review Fred's bank statements and discovered that he was using an offshore bank linked to money laundering. This revelation shocked the local community, as Fred was known as a prosecutor, lawyer, and part-time city judge. No one had suspected his involvement in such serious illegal activities. Sarah had documents showing Fred's participation in various criminal offenses, including financial fraud. She intended to use this information to pursue a divorce and gain custody of their children. However, this evidence did not demonstrate that Fred was a murderer or that he had hired someone to kill his wife. Detectives then learned about Fred's new business partner, Eddie Lawrence. Eddie bought a few small properties, renovated them and rented them out for profit. Despite this, he still struggled financially and continued to borrow money. Through these transactions, Eddie became connected to Fred and incurred debt to him, drawing the attention of investigators. A few days later, a confidential informant reached out to the police and said that Eddie was looking for a hitman, specifically someone named Curtis Rower, to commit a murder. When confronted, he denied any knowledge of Curtis. Nevertheless, the informant was deemed credible, leading to Eddie's arrest on December 16, 1982, without the option for bail. Following this, investigators intensified their search for Curtis and questioned Eddie again. Eddie, however, remained uncooperative with investigators. Eventually, on December 22nd, officers located Curtis hiding in an abandoned house. He had a history of minor crime convictions, including car theft and robbery, and was currently on probation for a recent similar offense. Curtis spoke to investigators and admitted that he was the one who took Sarah and the children out of town. However, he stated that he couldn't bring himself to kill her. Although he was hired as a hitman, he lacked the bravery to pull the trigger, as he had never killed anyone before. His past offenses had been minor, but now he faced serious charges, including aggravated kidnapping. Curtis disclosed that he didn't stop at a random location, he stopped where Eddie was waiting for them. Sarah recognized Eddie and tried to run him over with her car but failed. After that, she pushed Ricky to the ground to protect herself. Eddie's target was not the children, it was Sarah, and he attacked her. Eddie chose not to comment on Curtis's statement. Later, several witnesses came forward, describing Eddie as an addict with significant mental health issues. They reported that he bragged about having killed a woman. After this incident, Eddie agreed to a plea bargain. He had debts to Fred, who had hired him to find a killer. Fred promised to clear Eddie's debts and give him half of Sarah's life insurance policy. Eddie claimed he tried to talk Fred out of the plan, but when Fred paid him $25,000 up front, he felt he had no choice. Eddie organized a fake trip but stated that he did not want to kill anyone himself, so he hired Curtis for $5,000. Eddie maintained that he did not wait around or take part in the crime. Following this incident, Fred held a press conference in which he stated that he was not involved in his wife's death and claimed he was being slandered. He later closed his law practice, put the family home up for sale, and rented a garbage container to dispose of everything he didn't take with him. Fred collected his belongings and moved to Palm Beach with his mother. As stipulated in her will, Sarah's children were taken care of by her younger sister. Fred visited the children 2 or 3 times a month, meeting with Sarah's family. He insisted he was not involved in her death, but no one believed him. Eddie Lawrence accepted a plea bargain and was sentenced to 12 years in prison, on the condition that he testify against Curtis and Fred. The trial for Curtis Rover began, and thanks to his lawyer's strategies, he avoided the death penalty. Instead, he received a life sentence with the possibility of early conditional release. Curtis continued to insist that Eddie was in the car with him. Detectives then decided to arrest Fred. As he was with the children at the time, investigators pretended to be journalists to coax him out of the house. During the investigation, it was discovered that Fred had attempted to end his life shortly after learning of his wife's death. He insisted that it was a coincidence and not intentional, but the police were skeptical. They understood his attempt to end his life as a sign of guilt and believed he was involved in his wife's murder. On August 20, 1993, Fred was charged with being a lawyer for a group involved in the distribution of banned substances and money laundering through the clubs he owned with Eddie Lawrence. The money from these activities was funneled into offshore bank accounts. Fred maintained his innocence, claiming he had no involvement in illegal activities or in planning his wife's murder. In 1994, Fred was convicted of financial fraud and sentenced to life in prison. His trial for Sarah's murder did not occur until 1997, when the prosecutor sought the death penalty. Although Ricky did not testify against his father, previous statements he made were introduced in court. Fred's mother, Norma, tearfully urged the judge not to impose the death penalty, arguing that it would leave Ricky and Mike without any parents. Sarah's family shared the challenges Ricky faced. He sometimes feared returning home because he worried his grandparents might be dead and a killer might be inside. To ease his fears, adults had to accompany him to show that everything was fine before he could calm down. Ricky often had trouble sleeping, waking up in distress. When discussions about his mother arose, he would shut his eyes, cry, and cover his ears, begging others to stop talking, seemingly reliving the trauma of that night. Ultimately, Fred Tokars was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, concluding the family's quest for justice. After Fred was convicted of Sarah's murder, his sons never spoke to him again. Ricky grew up and worked in a medical organization where he helped others. Fred's life ended tragically as well. In 2020, he died of natural causes in prison at the age of 67. His attorney reported that he had a neurological disease that contributed to his death. Coincidentally, Fred's 31-year-old son, Mike, also died from a similar disease that same year. Sarah Tokar's family was once warm and hopeful, but it collapsed due to a heartbreaking tragedy caused by the very person she trusted the most, her husband, Fred Tokars. Fred, a respected prosecutor and lawyer, hired a killer to end Sarah's life. This immense loss, along with the deaths of Fred and their son Mike, left Ricky as the sole survivor, bearing the burden of their shared past. This case not only shocked public opinion due to its level of brutality and surprise, but it also served as a profound warning. Sometimes, evil hides behind a facade of morality and power. It reminds us that true safety and happiness do not lie in external appearances but in honesty, respect, and genuine love within a family. In 2010, Erin Orchid was a 25-year-old single mother looking to start a new relationship after her unsuccessful marriage. On Saturday, April 3rd, she was working as a waitress at a bar restaurant in the Ontario Mills Mall near San Bernardino, California. The shop had very few customers that day, so the owner allowed her to go home early, shortly after noon. For Erin, this was good news because it meant she would have more time to spend with her young son. As Erin made her way to the SUV in the parking lot, she pressed the unlock button twice. Just as she was about to get in, two unfriendly men approached her rapidly. Before she could react or scream, one of them jumped into the passenger seat of her SUV, brandished a weapon, and demanded that she move to the driver's seat. Inside the vehicle, Erin glanced around and noticed that the parking lot, usually bustling with people, was eerily empty. With no one around to help and her captor's accomplice seeming to enjoy the chaos, she felt hopeless and trapped. The accomplice, a large man, sat in the back, and they began driving around the city, apparently looking for a location. He eventually directed her to the restaurant's parking lot. To her shock, this was one of her favorite places, where she often brought her child and friends. Erin hoped someone would recognize her vehicle and call for help. But it was all in vain, as they merely drove around the restaurant parking lot without anyone noticing. The kidnapper was searching for a deserted location. The kidnapper eventually noticed a secluded alley by a distant garbage container and ordered her to park there, out of sight from security cameras. Though she complied, she was desperate to find a way to escape. After parking behind the restaurant, he commanded her to move to the back seat, right next to her child's car seat. Unsure of what to do and hoping to survive, she obeyed. She pleaded with him to let her go, offering to take the car and her wallet, and promised she would not contact the police. Despite her tears, This only angered the kidnapper. In his rage, he pressed the weapon to her mouth and warned her to be quiet or he would attack. Once he had calmed down, he forced her to undress and attempted to abuse her, but he failed, which only increased his fury. He then began to beat her, striking her repeatedly in the face and stomach. She tried to remain silent and endure the pain to avoid further provoking him. The tinted windows of her SUV meant that no one could see the beating from outside. She was filled with dread as she realized she was trapped. The criminal could do anything to her in this isolated location. The attack lasted for more than an hour, during which he made several additional attempts to abuse her. Each failed attempt was followed by more beatings, focusing on her stomach and face, and he occasionally strangled her. After his abusive attempts, he forced her to pose for pictures without clothes, demanding that she smile and look appealing. She complied out of fear of violence, hoping that soon this nightmare would end and she would be reunited with her son. The bullying included cynical comments, and the photos taken were quickly sent to someone else. Despite Aaron's desperate pleas, he continued to emotionally torment her, repeatedly saying that she would soon die. Eventually, he lost interest in the terrifying photo shoot and declared it was time to drive to the desert. As he got back behind the wheel, Aaron realized with dread that he intended to kill her. She, exhausted and emotionally broken, rejected the idea of her life ending in such a tragic way. As she frantically searched for a way to escape, an unexpected distraction occurred. The criminal's mobile phone rang before they left. He hesitated and began to act recklessly, clearly underestimating her. From her position in the back seat, Aaron closely observed his every move. He carelessly tossed his weapon onto the floor of the passenger side and nervously answered the call. He then made a critical mistake by activating the child's safety locks. Seizing the opportunity, Aaron realized those locks only applied to the passenger side of the back seat, where her son usually sat. This allowed her to slip out through the back door next to the driver's seat. She bolted from the car, sprinting across the empty restaurant parking lot. Despite the pain, she pushed herself to run as fast as possible, feeling her pursuer's breath closing in. She yelled for help, waving her arms to attract attention. Unbeknownst to her, the owner of a local fast food restaurant across the street had been watching the SUV closely as it circled the secluded area multiple times. The driver's behavior seemed suspicious to him. He noticed the SUV had stopped for an extended period, and though he wasn't sure what was happening, he felt compelled to investigate. On high alert, he planned to call the police if he saw anything alarming. Initially, he considered that a robbery might be in progress. When he saw Aaron running across the parking lot, crying and waving her arms, he immediately rushed to her side. He took her into his restaurant, hoping to keep her safe. He quickly hid her behind the bar, fearing that the criminal might enter the restaurant. Aaron had to gather her thoughts and wait for the police to arrive. Time was ticking, and she was visibly shaken, glancing anxiously at her car. Initially, the kidnapper approached the vehicle, got inside for a while, then suddenly jumped out and ran away in the opposite direction, clearly trying to escape. Aaron screamed in panic as he ran off. When the police finally arrived, they found Aaron's car still parked where she had left it, which left them confused. Unbeknownst to her, she had instinctively locked the car after stopping behind the garbage bins. After her escape, the car became unusable, preventing the kidnapper from driving it away. Instead, he fled on foot. Minutes passed before the police arrived, and they immediately searched the vehicle. They found that the attacker had left behind substantial evidence, which included a weapon lying on the floor near the passenger seat. This was a major blunder on his part, and the police considered it a crucial lead in their investigation. The weapon was anticipated to be sent for forensic analysis. However, this quickly became unnecessary since a label with the owner's identification number was found underneath the handle. This raised suspicions that the kidnapper might have been a law enforcement officer, as such labels are commonly used by police personnel. Nonetheless, this remained speculative, as the weapon could have been stolen from anywhere. The weapon was cross-referenced with the service weapon database. They also found protective glasses in the SUV that the attacker had worn, along with numerous DNA samples and fingerprints he had left behind in the car. All of this evidence was collected for further analysis. Biological evidence collected from Aaron's SUV provided information that could identify the kidnapper, which might be crucial for the upcoming hearing. Meanwhile, the police department was processing paperwork related to the gun theft and discovered that the gun belonged to Anthony Orban, a 30-year-old man. They tracked his location and found he was nearby. Aaron was placed in the back seat of a police vehicle, and they drove to an area just a short distance from her workplace. She quickly identified two men, her kidnapper and his accomplice. Surprisingly, the kidnapper turned out to be Detective Anthony Orban, who specialized in abuse cases. He used a service weapon against her. His accomplice turned out to be Jeffrey Jelinek, a prison guard. This revelation shocked everyone, and they were determined to ensure both men faced justice. After 72 terrifying minutes in the car with her kidnapper, Aaron realized that a series of fortunate events, starting with a phone call, had likely saved her life. Upon searching Jeffrey, the police found the keys to Aaron's SUV in his pocket. He claimed that Anthony had given them to him and that he didn't know whose keys they were. Both Anthony and Jeffrey denied the charges, but their denials contradicted Aaron's testimony and the CCTV footage that showed her abduction. The evidence against them was overwhelming, leading to their arrest and swift developments in the case. Afterwards, Aaron was rushed to the hospital. She had multiple injuries that needed treatment, but fortunately, they were not serious. However, the emotional impact on her was much more severe, and she would need a considerable amount of time to recover. At the medical center, evidence was collected to support the charges of abuse against Anthony and Jeffrey. Anthony stated that his weapon had been stolen and denied having any involvement in the attack. He tried to convince others that the real abductor was still on the loose. He argued that Aaron was in shock and unreliable, but he struggled to explain how his DNA and sunglasses had ended up in Aaron's car. Meanwhile, Jeffrey clung to his implausible story, ignoring the contradictions. The seriousness of the charges and the convincing evidence led to increased pressure from the police, prompting Jeffrey to cooperate with the investigation. He handed over his mobile phone, which contained messages exchanged with Anthony. It also had photos of Aaron showing signs of abuse, which he had shared with a friend. In detail, he had texted about the events happening in the car. This became additional evidence against him. From the start, he tried to distance himself from the horrific actions of Anthony, claiming that he did not participate and viewing the kidnapping as a joke. Yet, it was evident that he had taken pleasure in the situation. According to Jeffrey, he and Anthony had been drinking all day on Saturday, April 3rd, and were using banned substances. Out of nowhere, Anthony suggested they hunt for girls. He had been speaking poorly of women due to issues in his family and proposed that they capture someone to scare her. They drove around the city looking for a target until they spotted Aaron leaving work and walking through the empty parking lot toward her car. Unfortunately for her, there were no other people around, so they decided to take advantage of the situation. As Anthony and Jeffrey approached Aaron, the kidnapping occurred. Jeffrey acknowledged that he enjoyed Anthony's actions, but he claimed that he did not take part in the attack. Finally, Anthony was charged with kidnapping, abuse, and assault, and he remained in jail while awaiting trial. Jeffrey faced fewer charges, but investigators believed he was downplaying his involvement and also deserved to be imprisoned for a long time. Without Jeffrey's assistance, Anthony likely wouldn't have been able to carry out the kidnapping alone, which would have left Aaron with a chance to escape. Thus, Jeffrey played a crucial role in the crime. Anthony showed no remorse for his actions. In fact, prison recordings revealed that he was discussing plans for a new kidnapping of Aaron with multiple people. This infuriated the police detective, as Aaron was now in real danger. He likely wanted to eliminate her as a witness to prevent her from testifying against him. This threat motivated the police to expedite their investigation. The situation escalated when Aaron's family started receiving threatening phone calls. Although security was increased, the caller could not be traced. Eventually, Aaron managed to stop the disturbing calls without facing any repercussions. When the trial started in the summer of 2012, Aaron was given special support in the courtroom. Law enforcement officers positioned themselves between Anthony and Aaron to protect her from any potential attacks by the defendant. Aaron had to summon her courage to testify against him before the jury. The trial of Anthony started, and it quickly became clear that he would not admit to any wrongdoing and would strive for acquittal. He began his testimony by discussing his addiction to illegal substances, claiming that this was what drove him to commit his terrible actions. He argued that his breakdown resulted from a mix of substances, including alcohol and doctor-prescribed antidepressants. In fact, he had a prescription for several months before the attack. Anthony claimed that he was under significant stress from his overwhelming workload and believed that the combination of medications, alcohol, and banned substances led him to be unaware of his actions. He painted a picture of his life as chaotic, citing financial troubles 6 months prior to the kidnapping and increasing tension at home as his marriage fell apart. Over the years, professional pressures had intensified to an unbearable level, contributing to his mental health issues. While Anthony was clearly attempting to evoke sympathy, he was also trying to rehabilitate his image. Anthony recounted his brave service to the country as a Marine Corps veteran who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Despite facing these challenges, he suffered from the lingering effects of military action. He expressed that this trauma led to anxiety, which developed into a serious disorder over time. He frequently experienced violent thoughts, including harming his wife and their dog, but claimed he managed to control these impulses towards his loved ones. He even mentioned that he felt as if he were possessed by demons. Despite these troubling statements, his wife, Tracy Orban, supported him and testified on his behalf during the trial. She confirmed that Anthony had recently started taking medication, which significantly altered his behavior. Before this treatment, he had not shown aggression or cruelty, but after beginning therapy, these negative traits emerged. His worsening behavior contributed to family issues. Unfortunately, Anthony needed to continue taking the prescribed medication, as it helped him manage the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder. While his testimony was compelling, the prosecutor's office had a different perspective on his story. The prosecution believed that Anthony intimidated his wife, Tracy, into testifying. During a search of his home, investigators found a magazine with a bookmarked article about a war veteran from Iraq, which closely mirrored Anthony and Tracy's story. The article describes symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, including thoughts of harming both his wife and their dog, as well as thoughts of ending his life. This led the prosecution to conclude that Anthony's account was fabricated, taken from someone else's experience. Jeffrey, an accomplice who agreed to testify in exchange for a lighter sentence, shifted the blame onto Anthony. As part of his deal, several serious charges against Jeffrey were dropped, which could have resulted in a minimum 10-year sentence. He provided a detailed description of the attack that aligned with Aaron's testimony. Public support turned against Anthony, and even Tracy appeared eager for him to be convicted. In front of the jury, Jeffrey confirmed Aaron's fears by stating that Anthony had no intention of allowing her to survive. If she had not escaped, she would have been killed. Although Jeffrey initially claimed he thought the incident was just a game, he acknowledged that Anthony planned to take Aaron into the desert after the assault to eliminate her. Anthony aimed to conceal the body, hoping it would be discovered much later, after all evidence had vanished. Given that Anthony was a seasoned detective, he was fully aware of how to avoid detection. In June 2012, the jury gathered to discuss the verdict and concluded that the prosecution's account of the incident was credible. Anthony, a former detective, was convicted on 8 charges, including kidnapping and abuse, primarily because of the false narratives he provided. His defense argued that he was temporarily insane during the attack, but this claim was unsuccessful. Consequently, he was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 95 years, ensuring that this dangerous criminal would remain behind bars. However, the harsh sentence took a toll on Anthony, who, realizing that his insanity defense had failed, saw no hope left for his future. As a former detective serving time for serious crimes, he endured a nightmarish existence in prison. Unable to cope, he ended his life the night after the verdict was announced. In the aftermath, Anthony's wife, Tracy, disclosed that she had been coerced into testifying in his favor, as he had threatened her with violence if she refused. Understanding her predicament, Barron's family showed compassion toward her, recognizing that she too had suffered due to his abusive behavior. The trial continued for Jeffrey, an accomplice who, due to his cooperation with the prosecution, received a sentence of just 5 years and 4 months. He served his time in a California state prison but was released early for good behavior after only 3 years, in March 2013. This decision sparked outrage among Aaron's supporters, who viewed Jeffrey as complicit in the crime. Many felt that he had a responsibility to intervene and prevent the attack, and his indifference could have led to far worse outcomes for Aaron. Jeffrey's mother defended her son, saying he was a victim of his circumstances and Anthony's irresponsible actions, for which he should not be blamed. After the investigation, the police and some concerned citizens began to suspect that Anthony was a serial kidnapper involved in many similar incidents. They questioned whether there were unfortunate girls in the desert who faced worse fates than Aaron. Jeffrey rejected these ideas, insisting he knew nothing about such events and that this was the first time he had ever acted as an accomplice. Jeffrey's words helped confirm the findings when examining the communication between him and Anthony, which had never addressed such serious topics before. However, an investigation of Anthony's computer and mobile phone uncovered more disturbing evidence. He had been searching online for information about abuse and murders in recent months, which suggests that he might have been planning something sinister. Anthony treated Aaron as if he had complete control, demonstrating a lack of awareness of the situation. A more skilled criminal would not have been apprehended. Anthony made too many mistakes, which would ultimately cost him dearly in his personal life. Aaron Orcutt shared her experiences and their lasting impact on her life. She described the fear and trauma that she felt would remain with her forever. During the trial, she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, which made even simple car trips terrifying, especially when she was the one driving. She became anxious around shadows and felt intense fear when encountering unfamiliar men, which even affected her feelings towards some male relatives. Recovery took several months, and even after years, she still faced panic attacks and nightmares linked to her traumatic memories. On the other hand, Aaron felt as if she had experienced a miracle or a stroke of luck on Saturday, April 3, 2010. She attributed this to her habits, particularly her decision to lock her car, which prevented the criminal from escaping and destroying crucial evidence. As she started to overcome her post-traumatic stress disorder, she began engaging in motivational and educational activities, hoping to help save others from similar experiences. On February 14, 2023, in Lincoln County, Oklahoma, a 15-year-old named Colin Griffith called 911. He reported that his father, Charles Robert Griffith, was dead. Officers arrived and found Charles with no signs of life. He had been shot in the head, chest, and had bled out before the doctors could help. According to Colin, another conflict had occurred between them, which was a frequent occurrence in their family, but this time, everything escalated. Charles had cornered his son with a knife, forcing Colin to defend his life. In the heat of the struggle, Colin shot his father and claimed it was an act of self-defense. Colin was immediately detained and taken to the police station for further investigation. He remained surprisingly calm and explained his version of the events in detail. Initially, his account seemed convincing, and he was released. However, as the investigation continued, more evidence emerged that contradicted Colin's statements. He was called in for questioning again to clarify the discrepancies in his story. During this second interview, the detectives expressed their disbelief, and Colin subsequently refused to cooperate, demanding a lawyer. He was then arrested, with a bail set at $50,000. His mother, Catherine, paid the bail immediately, allowing him to return home. Catherine revealed that she had divorced Charles long before and that there had been a prolonged custody battle. Colin had moved in with his father in 2019, 4 years before the tragic incident, which had become a significant problem. Charles had prevented any communication between mother and son, allowing only occasional phone calls. During one of these calls, Colin informed Catherine that his father had forbidden him from attending school, isolating him within their home and subjecting him to constant pressure. Colin stated that he had been trapped in his father's house for the last 4 years and was not even allowed to eat more than once a day. Detectives reviewed documents related to Catherine and Charles's lengthy divorce proceedings. Throughout their marriage, Charles had continually abused Catherine, who had reported him to the police multiple times, but the authorities had not taken action. After the divorce, Catherine lost her ability to see Colin. In August of the divorce year, Catherine sought sole custody since Charles impeded all contact between her and Colin. Colin reported that his father continually denigrated Catherine. As the investigation progressed, Charles claimed that he had severed communication between mother and son after Catherine threatened to commit end her own life, painting her as dependent on alcohol and banned substance. He justified restricting contact as necessary for Colin's well-being. Charles even presented evidence that Catherine attempted to pose as someone else on Discord to chat with Colin and urged him to escape from his father's home. Despite substantial evidence of abuse by Charles, Colin was charged with first-degree murder. About a month later, prosecutors announced they could not gather enough convincing evidence for the teenager's guilt regarding the intentional murder of Charles. It appeared that Colin acted in self-defense while fleeing from his dangerous and unstable father. In March 2023, Colin was acquitted and returned to his mother's custody, placed under house arrest, and required to wear a tracking device. After their long-awaited reunion, Catherine began posting on social media to share these moments, including photographs related to Charles, culminating in an image of his grave. While she expressed relief in ending her relationship with Charles, she lamented that she hadn't done so sooner. As Colin gradually began to recover from his psychological trauma and reintegrate into society, about 7 months had passed since the tragic events. However, the sheriff's office received a call to check on the Griffith household. An officer arrived to find a visibly agitated Colin, who claimed that his mother had taken a gun, threatened to kill him, and then handed him the weapon, urging him to shoot her. This raised concerns about Catherine's mental health. When questioned, she insisted that Colin was lying, asserting that he was upset because she had confiscated his phone and headphones due to his poor school performance. Catherine expressed concern that Colin might be suffering from a severe form of post-traumatic stress disorder. This stress was a result of the circumstances surrounding the murder of his father, leading to unstable behavior during this period. In Florida, the so-called Baker Act was in effect, which mandated that individuals suspected of serious mental disorders be involuntarily placed in medical institutions for appropriate assistance. Under this law, detention in a clinic is required for 72 hours to establish a diagnosis. During this period, examinations are conducted to determine whether the patient requires longer and more serious treatment in isolation from society. Colin was placed in the appropriate facility under this law, where the staff heard him threaten violence, insisting that if he was sent home, he would either take his own life or kill his mother. Detectives spoke with Catherine, who stated that throughout the time her son lived with her, he had been visiting a psychotherapist. When the detectives spoke to the specialist, it became evident that Colin had threatened them if he received a serious diagnosis that would result in his being placed in a clinic. Consequently, instead of addressing the real issues he was experiencing, the psychotherapist noted only minor disorders, for which mild sedatives were prescribed. After this revelation, it was decided to keep Colin under psychiatric supervision for an additional 5 days, as the staff of the institution deemed him too dangerous to be released. A week later, Colin was returned to his mother. During the car ride, He stated again that he would kill himself or his mother if he were near her again, repeating that he had already killed his father and would do it again without hesitation. Catherine was frightened and began searching for a more suitable clinic that could accept Colin for long-term treatment. Unfortunately, similar clinics in Florida were overcrowded, which caused delays. Despite these challenges, Catherine managed to find an appropriate psychiatric clinic in Florida that could accommodate her son for the following months. However, the day when he was supposed to return to his mother was inexorably approaching. 2 months had passed, and in November, 15-year-old Colin returned home. 2 days later, emergency services received a 911 call from his maternal grandmother, Susan Detman. She reported that during a joint lunch, Colin had suddenly stood up, pulled his mother by the hair, and hit her in the groin. When she fell to the floor, he began to kick her. Upon the police's arrival, Colin again insisted that it was self-defense, as in the case with his father. However, his grandmother disagreed. She recounted witnessing her grandson's aggression, stating that he had initiated the attack on his mother. Colin was arrested for domestic violence but was soon released again. Once more, he threatened to take his own life or kill his mother right at the police station. It seemed that he did not want to go back to his mother because he did not feel safe with her. Colin described his life with her as a struggle between the desire to escape and the need to defend himself. Nevertheless, in February 2024, they began living together again, although a special prohibition order was issued to limit Colin's contact with Catherine in the house. This was similar to a restraining order but was designed to manage potentially dangerous individuals living in close quarters. Its effectiveness in such a confined space is hard to determine. On February 14, 2024, Colin went to his grandmother's house, but he was quickly located and was about to be returned to his mother. In May of that same year, they were reunited after he had spent another period of forced detention in a psychiatric hospital. During this time, Colin graduated from high school and was planning to continue his education in college. To aid his transition, his mother gifted him a brand new Volkswagen car worth $26,000. On her social media, numerous photos appeared showing her enjoying happy trips with her son to different places. Unfortunately, in reality, all of this was merely a facade, as the situation within the family was far from ideal. On September 8, 2024, 17-year-old Colin Griffith contacted the city police station once again, stating that he had a fight with his mother at his grandmother's house. Catherine had attacked him with a knife. They fought for a long time, and Catherine accidentally fell on the bladed weapon herself, resulting in a serious wound to her neck. On that fateful day, Colin was at his grandmother's house. When the sheriff's deputies arrived, they found him covered in blood, but he behaved very calmly and restrained. He recounted the story of self-defense and claimed that he was not guilty of his mother's death. Interestingly, several neighbors who lived nearby reported that they had become involuntary witnesses to Colin's inappropriate behavior. Colin had come to his grandmother's house a few days before these events, with his mother arriving later. Colin quarreled with his mother almost all day, and everyone in the area heard their arguments. About half an hour before the alleged murder, neighbors saw him dragging his mother by the hair and pulling her inside his grandmother's house. Catherine cried in pain and begged him to let her go, but she was unable to escape from her aggressive son. In the days leading up to these events, Colin had quarreled with his mother over chores around the house, which he had refused to do. Catherine complained to several friends and relatives on social media about Colin's behavior, expressing her concerns. In the days leading up to her death, Catherine had been actively communicating with friends. She frequently discussed Colin's behavior, describing him as uncontrollable and dangerous. She did not want to bring him back home from her mother's house. Catherine expressed feeling exhausted and tired of his antics, fearing for her safety and life. During that time, the grandmother was away and could not witness the events firsthand. However, it is possible that her absence saved her life. Colin lived peacefully in grandmother's house alone for 2 days until his mother arrived. Shortly before the grandmother's return, the house was filled with forensic experts who began an active investigation into all the circumstances surrounding the incident. They managed to find the alleged murder weapon, which turned out to be a bloody kitchen knife. The grandmother was initially convinced that her grandson was guilty of what had happened. However, she later radically changed her mind. The prosecutor's office believed that Colin was lying. They wished to try him as an adult and impose a lengthy prison sentence in order to protect the public from a potentially dangerous individual. The forensic expert identified a deep, penetrating wound in Catherine's neck. However, this did not correspond with an accidental injury. According to the expert's conclusion, the blow was delivered with such force that it was impossible for her to have accidentally fallen onto the knife. The nature of her death led to the consideration of premeditated murder. After this discovery, Oklahoma detectives also questioned whether Colin's actions had been classified correctly in relation to his father. One of Catherine's ex-boyfriends, a man named Robert, posted a video within 24 hours of her murder. In it, he discussed his experiences with her and Colin. He noted that Colin was well trained in self-defense despite his young age. Colin was proficient in using cold weapons and had hand-to-hand combat skills, which he claimed were taught to him by his father while he was alive. Robert also learned about Colin's many mental disorders and believed this was a legacy from his father. He described Catherine as a very complex individual but believed she would not have been capable of an armed attack on her son or of voluntarily taking her own life. The police officers in this city were well acquainted with Colin, considering his described behavior to be indicative of clinical psychopathy. Catherine was described as a loving but somewhat frivolous mother who paid with her life for her sincere feelings for her son. After these tragic events, a press conference was held, and it became apparent to the detectives that Colin showed absolutely no remorse for what had happened. He did not express regret over the loss of his closest family members. The most disturbing aspect was the cold-blooded indifference he demonstrated while communicating with the police. Police investigators spoke with the grandmother, who confirmed that her daughter had been complaining for about a year, since Charles's murder, about how Colin had been inflicting real emotional terror on her. Both women were simply afraid to be around him and did not feel safe. The grandmother feared that she could easily become the next victim if nothing was done. Forensic experts examined the crime scene and identified major contradictions in Colin's account. There were no signs of a struggle inside the house, even though he insisted that he had been arguing with his mother for at least half an hour. It appeared as though he had simply taken a knife and stabbed her in the neck without any signs of a struggle. The aggression displayed by Colin towards his mother was corroborated by neighbors who witnessed him dragging her by the hair. No one saw Catherine attack or even threaten her son. Experts analyzing Colin's case concluded that he suffered from psychopathy. According to their observations, such individuals are capable of wearing a mask of sanity and may outwardly seem quite normal. However, deep down, they hide serious emotional deficits and mental development disorders. Such people can be mean and callous. They willingly and actively showing aggression while boldly socially dominating. They are unable to recognize fear or aggression in others and do not demonstrate these qualities themselves in any way. This is one of the dangerous traits of a psychopath, as he will easily pass a polygraph test. This has been a recurring issue in the history of crime incidents related to some of the most brutal crimes in the world. Holograph equipment reacts to the manifestation of emotions, in particular fear, which are blocked in a psychopath. In addition, they can be impulsive and inhibited. Those involved in this case, as well as in the analysis of Colin's condition, cited examples of the most notorious psychopaths who have committed terrible crimes in their lives. It was believed that Colin Griffith could repeat their path if he was not stopped in time. Against this backdrop, the chief prosecutor in Oklahoma stated that it is necessary to take a closer look at the death of Charles Griffith, as evidence of Catherine's murder suggested that both the father and mother were victims of premeditated murder. The murder of the father could have been reopened and reviewed, but there were complications. The prime suspect, Colin, had approached his defense thoroughly. It all began when Colin called 911. He used vague wording and did not even say that his mother was dead, as if he did not know this. In fact, Catherine was so injured that she bled to death within minutes. When detectives arrived at Colin's grandmother's house, they found him bloodied, yet he remained calm and composed, so much so that his demeanor astonished them. Colin Griffith was charged with the assault and first-degree murder of his mother. The prosecutor described in detail the problematic relationship between Colin and his mother, also focusing on the domestic violence that Catherine had accused her son of several months before her death. The prosecution showed recordings and digital evidence of Colin's threats to harm his mother. To refute, the defense attorney insisted that Catherine was eccentric and unpredictable, with periodic outbursts of aggression, which contributed to the events of that fateful day. Prosecution witnesses described Colin's behavior as dispassionate and cold, even including the detective who spoke with him during the first half hour after the murder. His behavior did not indicate at all that he had just lost a loved one. It is noteworthy that no signs of a struggle were found on Colin's body, despite his insistence that his mother had attacked him first. There were bruises on Catherine's stomach. Colin likely hit his mother with his knee and kicked her with his shoe. At the same time, there was a significant amount of her blood on him when the police arrived. Colin attributed these traces to an attempt to provide first aid to his mother before the paramedics arrived. The emergency services dispatcher did consult him on this issue, but it was highly questionable whether he actually assisted her. Law enforcement officers, already familiar with Colin, spoke at the trial, particularly regarding a previous case where Colin was charged with domestic violence. At that time, obvious traces of a struggle were found on Catherine's body, while Colin insisted that she had hit him first in the face, though he showed no signs of any injuries. Naturally, the young man was not believed. These same witnesses confirmed that he had threatened to harm both his mother and grandmother during his compulsory treatment. During cross-examination, Colin insisted that he did not feel safe at home and even expressed a desire to stay in the correctional facility. Several law enforcement officers who worked with him after the domestic violence incident stated that they were forced to return him to his family solely because of regulations. Many acknowledged that this could lead to serious consequences for everyone involved. Those who knew the family well described Colin as a manipulator and a cruel person. He could appear friendly and respectful to those who provided him with valuable gifts, such as his mother and grandmother. Catherine took him on trips, bought him video games, a mobile phone, and other gadgets, and even purchased him a car. However, as soon as he heard the word no or received a request for help around the house, he would change. He'd become genuinely angry and dangerous. Experts who worked with Colin in a psychiatric clinic discovered that he had two distinct personalities, which he referred to as Colin the First and Colin the Second. The first personality merely wanted to survive. He was a downtrodden and frightened schoolboy, while the second was cruel and ready to protect the first at all costs, even to the point of killing for him. When the forensic expert who conducted the examination of the deceased spoke on behalf of the prosecution, he described in detail the wounds sustained by Catherine. The knife blade had passed through the esophagus, the trachea, and the vocal cords. Its tip protruded on the other side. The forensic expert insisted that, of all the numerous cases involving deaths from knife wounds with which he had personally worked, there was not a single instance of such a voluntary departure from life, especially with such a deep wound. The expert was certain that to inflict such a deep wound required enormous effort. Simply falling on a knife would not cause such injuries, and this all pointed to murder. Other family members expressed great anxiety regarding the relationship between Colin and Catherine. For example, the maternal grandfather had heard several times how his grandson wished for the death of both his mother and grandmother. Catherine reported that Colin had threatened them both at least 3 times. Despite these threats, Catherine continued to insist that she loved her son and wanted him to live with her at home. Interestingly, the grandfather heard Colin express a desire to cut his mother's throat so that she would bleed to death, which was very similar to the injury inflicted on Catherine, considering the force with which the knife was thrust into her throat. Colin seemed to be experiencing an attack of cruelty and hatred directed against a loved one. When the defendant's lawyer took on the case, the most valuable witness for the defense unexpectedly turned out to be Colin's grandmother, Susan. She recounted numerous instances of Catherine's dubious behavior. For example, there was an occasion when she simply forgot that her son had been visiting his grandmother. Additionally, there were several instances in which Catherine had threatened to take her own life. Susan also mentioned that Catherine got pregnant for the first time when she was only 13 years old and gave birth to Colin when she was 22. According to Susan, Catherine was quite hot-tempered and eventually stopped all contact with her family. Susan claimed that Catherine had confessed to her that Catherine used violence against Colin, hitting him with a knee, a belt, even guns, and forcing him to do push-ups. Catherine feels burdened having to wake up early in the morning to take her mentally challenged son to school. Susan insisted that Catherine should call Colin 3 times a day for the first week of his detention, but Catherine was encouraged when Colin was found guilty and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The change in the grandmother's testimony shocked many because earlier she had insisted that she was afraid of her grandson and that he threatened them. Now, it seemed she was shifting the blame for what happened to Catherine. In fact, she appeared so ready to malign her murdered daughter that it caused significant damage to the prosecution's case. In closing arguments, the prosecution emphasized that the defendant harbored hatred for his mother. This animosity ultimately led to the charge of premeditated murder against Colin. After hearing arguments from both sides, the jury deliberated on the verdict. The defense's arguments proved effective, and when the jury returned, they delivered a verdict of not guilty, concluding that Catherine was not being held against her will and that her death was largely viewed as a voluntary departure from life. They determined that she had provoked her own son into an altercation during which she died, whether accidentally or intentionally. In the wake of these events, disputes have continued, and serious doubts have emerged regarding whether the murder of Colin's father was truly an act of self-defense. Currently, an investigation into his father's death in Oklahoma is ongoing. Some relatives believe that if Colin had not escaped justice for his father's murder and if the Oklahoma prosecutor's office had acted more decisively, he would be behind bars and his mother would still be alive. As it stands, no one can feel safe, especially Susan, who actively supported him during the trial and to whom he has sent threats. The case of Colin Griffith is a heartbreaking tragedy where family conflicts and deep psychological trauma led to irreversible consequences. The deaths of both Charles and Catherine not only claimed 2 lives but also left unanswered questions about the nature of Colin, a teenager caught between the lines of victim and perpetrator. Although the court's decision freed him, the haunting effects of Colin's violent actions and suspicions about his motives continue to affect his family and community. While Susan and the rest of her family cope with fear and loss, this story serves as a reminder of the importance of timely intervention during mental health crises and domestic violence. Colin's life may go on, but the cost of these tragedies will forever be an indelible reminder that neglect and inaction can lead to irreversible, tragic outcomes. The Alberin family was a tightly knit, multi-generational unit residing at 560 North Hamilton Avenue in Indianapolis. At the heart of the family were Emma Valdez, 46, and her husband, Alberto Covarrubias, 56, who worked hard to create a loving, stable home for their children and grandchildren. Emma was known as a devoted mother, grandmother who united the family, while Alberto provided a consistent and supportive presence. Their blended family included Emma's children from a previous relationship, Flora Alberin, 22, and Magno Alberin, 29, as well as their 2 young sons, Alberto Jr., 11, and David, 8. The youngest family member was Flora's 5-year-old son, Luis. The family was well regarded in their community for being friendly, engaged, often taking part in local events and building strong relationships with their neighbors. Their children attended local schools, and their home frequently served as a gathering place for family celebrations. Despite facing various challenges, Emma and Alberto worked diligently to provide their children with opportunities for a better future. They emphasized the importance of education and resilience as core values. They faced difficult circumstances but managed to turn their situation around. Emma and Alberto always welcomed anyone into their home, unaware that one day, someone would enter, change their lives forever. Desmond Turner, 29, a petty criminal, became convinced that a large sum of money or banned substance was hidden in a safe at a house on Hamilton Avenue. This belief arose from local rumors within the banned substance community of which he was a part, even though the source of those rumors was unclear. Hoping for a quick and easy score, he asked James Stewart, 31, to join him in the robbery, thinking that having a partner would boost their confidence and ensure a smooth operation. Turner's knowledge of the neighborhood likely played a role in his decision, he seemed to have some prior connection to the family or their home, possibly through personal acquaintances or hearsay. It's also possible that someone he trusted misled him intentionally, directing him to this particular house. Some people believe Turner may have misinterpreted unrelated bits of information, leading him to mistakenly believe it was a high-value target. Driven by desperation, he viewed this as an opportunity to escape his difficult life. After a history of minor criminal activities, he was ready to take a risk for what he believed would be a significant reward. Stewart agreed to join the plan. However, despite their preparation, Turner's plan was built on incorrect assumptions and false information. Ultimately, their plan, fueled by misguided ambition, went far beyond what Turner or Stewart had ever expected. The initial plan set by Turner and Stewart was clear, straightforward: carry out a robbery, not a murder. Their goal is not to harm anyone but to steal anything they can find, especially cash or valuables. The house at 560 North Hamilton Avenue was the target. Turner and Stewart anticipated that the house would be empty or that anyone present would be an easy target to overpower quickly. They may have thought that the family would be away or at least off guard, allowing them to carry out the robbery without interference. However, once they entered the home, the unexpected happened. Within moments of being inside, their plans started to unravel. The presence of others in the home, combined with a quick confrontation, immediately changed the dynamic from that of a typical robbery to something much more complicated and dangerous. As they started to search the house for the safe, the situation quickly became more intense. The unexpected return of Magno turned the entire plan upside down. Magno had just come back home when he found two strangers inside. Armed, he felt an immediate need to protect his family, and in a split second, he drew his weapon. This shift caught the robbers by surprise. Up until that point, things seemed easy. Now they faced an armed threat that forced them into a corner. In a tense and unpredictable moment, Stewart acted on instinct, shooting Magno in defense of himself. After Magno fell, Turner and Stewart's options dwindled rapidly. With one man in the house now dead, the fear of being caught or identified was at the top of their list of concerns. Instead of fleeing or retreating, Turner made a decision based on panic. He might have realized that leaving any witnesses alive could eventually lead to their capture. Fearing the consequences of leaving the scene and not fully understanding the extent of what they had already done, Turner moved methodically through the house, targeting each family member he came across with a chilling sense of purpose. His actions unfolded without hesitation as he sought to eliminate any potential threats in his path. Flora, Magno's sister, was one of the first to encounter Turner. She was instantly confronted with the brutality of the situation. Her life was taken quickly. As he continued his relentless and cold execution of his plan, each family member became another victim in the nightmare that had unfolded. Next, Emma, the Albaran family's mother, and her husband, Alberto, tried desperately to protect their loved ones. Both understood that something horrific had taken place and knew they had to act fast to stop it. They attempted to fight back or intervene. They wanted to protect their family at all costs. However, their efforts were futile. Despite their bravery in the face of overwhelming violence, they were quickly overpowered. Turner left no time for the family to defend themselves. Every movement was executed with precision, marking the house with blood. It was clear that no one would survive in this house on Hamilton Avenue that day as Turner carried out each execution with brutal efficiency, securing the tragic fate of those who tried to fight back. Most devastating of all was Turner's decision to eliminate even the youngest members of the family, leaving no one alive. Alberto Jr., only 11 years old, David, who was 8, and little Luis, just 5, had no chance against Turner's cold determination. What might have been a robbery that spiraled out of control quickly devolved into a mass murder, marking the house with unspeakable tragedy. Turner's ruthless actions stripped the Albaran family of their future, severing the lives of 7 people. Turner and Stewart destroyed an entire family. The family members understood the violence happening around them. Unable to escape it, they were all attacked execution style, so they saw their assailants up close and knew what was happening. This massacre was not driven by pure hatred but by a cold, calculating desire to cover his tracks, no matter the cost. The loss of control over the situation, paired with their unwavering decision to keep killing, ensured that the entire household would never be alive. The spree lasted only a few minutes, but its impact was immeasurable. After carrying out the brutal murders, Turner and Stewart attempted to flee the crime scene as quickly as possible. Their primary goal at this point was to escape without leaving any trace that could be used to identify them or connect them to the massacre. They made their way out of the house, likely in hurried panic, still reeling from the violent acts they had just committed. In the chaos that followed, the robbers didn't take the time to cover their tracks. They exited the Hamilton Avenue house, made their way to their vehicle to drive away. Turner and Stewart had already planned their escape, knowing they needed to lay low for a while. In the days following the killings, they scattered and kept a low profile, hoping the police would focus on other possible suspects rather than immediately drawing connections to them. However, the killers were eventually tracked down thanks to a combination of physical evidence, witness testimonies, and diligent investigative work. The investigation into the massacre was initially slow given the lack of obvious clues at the crime scene. As the bodies were discovered and autopsies revealed the brutal nature of the killings, the police began looking for potential links to local criminals. Turner, with his criminal background and prior connections to the neighborhood, became a person of interest for the authorities. His involvement in local banned substance circles, combined with his known associations, brought him under suspicion. The breakthrough came when authorities pieced together information from multiple sources. Witnesses who had seen the two men near the crime scene before and after the murders helped identify them. Additionally, physical evidence, including fingerprints or DNA, was found at the scene, pointing investigators directly to Turner and Stewart. When they matched this information with witness statements, they were able to link both men to the crime and issue warrants for their arrest. Eventually, Turner and Stewart were found and taken into custody, followed an intense manhunt. Once in custody, Turner and Stewart confessed to the killings. However, that was just the beginning. The aftermath of the Hamilton Avenue massacre brought not only grief and fear to the local community but also the legal proceedings that followed, which exposed the shocking nature of the crime. Desmond Turner and James Stewart faced a variety of charges related to the murder of 7 people, including charges of murder, confinement for each of the victims, robbery, and burglary. The legal landscape was marred by a long and contentious trial. Turner was considered the mastermind behind the killings, both in terms of planning and execution. He faced nearly 24 charges ranging from murder to robbery. His trial began in October 2009 when the Marion County prosecutors presented their case. The prosecution's approach was methodical, laying out the robbery plot that led to the murders. According to the state's case, Turner and Stewart broke into the home at 560 North Hamilton Avenue with the intention of robbing the residents in search of a rumored stash of cocaine and money. The horrific events that followed were not spurred by any direct threat to Turner or Stewart. Rather, they resulted from their decision to eliminate anyone who might recognize them or who could pose a risk to their escape. One crucial aspect of Turner's trial was the fact that he faced the possibility of the death penalty. Just weeks before his trial began, this option was ultimately dismissed in exchange for Turner waiving his right to a jury trial. Turner chose to have a judge rule on his guilt rather than risk the uncertainties of a jury trial. One of the significant challenges faced by the state in prosecuting Turner was the lack of physical evidence directly linking him to the crime scene. While prosecutors could piece together the events through witness statements and circumstantial evidence, they struggled to find concrete DNA or other physical proof tying Turner directly to the murders. This gap in the physical evidence provided Turner's attorneys with grounds to challenge the prosecution's case, but it was not enough to sway the judge's decision. To counter the lack of physical evidence, prosecutors emphasized the witness testimonies, which painted a vivid picture of Turner and Stewart's actions before, during, and after the crime. On November 20th, 2009, throughout the trial, Turner maintained his innocence, arguing that he was merely in the wrong place at the wrong time and was unfairly implicated in the deaths. However, this did little to sway the jury or the judge, who had ample evidence to confirm Turner's role in the killings. Desmond Turner was convicted of 7 counts of murder, 7 counts of criminal confinement, burglary, and robbery. He was sentenced to life without parole plus 88 years. James Stewart's trial was set to begin after Turner's, with jury selection scheduled. Unlike Turner, Stewart opted to have his case heard by a jury of 12 plus 4 alternates. Stewart's defense strategy differed significantly from Turner's. Stewart stuck firmly to his claim of innocence, opting instead to challenge the evidence against him and present a defense based on an alibi. His attorney, Richard Bouchery, argued that Stewart was not present at the scene on the night of the murders and sought to cast doubt on the reliability of the testimonies that connected Stewart to the crime. This alibi defense placed the focus of Stewart's legal fight on trying to discredit the state's witnesses. Although Stewart had an opportunity to provide his defense, the evidence against him remained strong. Prosecutors believed that Stewart's handgun was responsible for at least one of the fatal shots, while the rest of the bullets came from Turner's assault rifle. Turner's defense attorneys tried to exploit a long-standing neighborhood feud to inject reasonable doubt into the case. Specifically, they pointed to a feud involving Valdez's son, Magno, who had no direct involvement in the incident but had been caught up in a dispute with another local family. Turner's lawyers claimed that the Albaran family's ongoing problems with local residents could have led to a mistaken accusation and false witness testimonies. However, Judge Robert Altus dismissed these theories, pointing out that the defense had failed to provide a reasonable alternative theory of innocence. This weakened the defense's argument. Finally, James Stewart was convicted of 7 counts of murder, 6 counts of criminal confinement, robbery, burglary, carrying a handgun without a license, and being a repeat offender. He was sentenced to 425 years on January 6, 2010. Both men have promised to appeal. Back to the house in the massacre, on August 23, 2008, just over 2 years after the killings, the house was set on fire in an arson attack. This deliberate act of destruction was likely meant to erase the physical reminder of the massacre that had shocked the entire community. The house was left to burn, with its walls no longer a home, but instead a shell of a horrific past. Ultimately, the house was demolished on July 16, 2010. The decision to destroy it was part of the effort to remove the last remnants of the traumatic event. What had been a place of family gatherings and memories was reduced to rubble, offering no trace of its violent past. However, something this dark can't really be fully erased. 7-year-old Jasmine Albaran's life was forever altered. She had repeatedly begged her mother to allow her to visit her father, Magno Albaran, on that fateful night, but Jasmine was told she couldn't go. It was a decision that unknowingly saved her life. The following morning, her mother, Kim Fisher, received a phone call informing her of a horrific event at the home of Jasmine's father and his family. At that address, the worst mass killing in Indianapolis's history had taken place, with 7 people, including Jasmine's father and several close relatives, gunned down by 2 men. Kim rushed to inform Jasmine, shattering her daughter's world. Jasmine, now an adult, said, "I went from this happy, carefree kid to someone I didn't even know." The sudden brutal loss of almost her entire family left Jasmine in shock, and she struggled to understand why the massacre had occurred. The trauma not only changed her emotional state but also her entire outlook on life. The grief did not cease with the conviction of the killers. Jasmine's family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. For more than a year, Jasmine's mother, Kim Fisher, had been locked within the walls of their home, unable to find the will to leave. Over time, with the help of therapy and medication, the pain began to subside, though it would never be fully gone. Kim and Jasmine leaned on their faith to help navigate the monumental grief. Jasmine learned that her father and his family would have wanted her to forgive and move on rather than become consumed by the pain and anger from their violent deaths. "I don't live with evil in my heart," Jasmine said as she reflected on her ability to forgive the men responsible. 28-year-old Gable Tosti called his dad after Wariana Wright, a woman he met on Tinder, fell from the 14th floor balcony of his high-rise apartment. "I met up with the girl for a date tonight, and, things were getting really aggressive. It was all about intimate at first, and then, after that, we kept drinking. We were both drinking. I think she was so drunk that she tried to climb over the fence and fell down." The police found an audio recording on Gable's phone that captured the ill-fated date. It should be noted that he had a strange habit of recording all his meetings with girls. Surfers' Paradise, the coastal town on Australia's Gold Coast, and one of the country's most iconic tourist destinations. 60 miles of white sandy beaches attract outdoor enthusiasts. When it comes to entertainment, there are options like water skiing, theme parks, night markets, restaurants, and sun-soaked walks. Here, you can easily meet a guy with a predatory look, a pumped-up body. In August 2014, a 26-year-old New Zealander, Wariana, enjoyed her freedom after a long-term relationship ended. Relaxing in this paradise at a friend's wedding, Wariana took a break between dances, picked up her phone, and opened the Tinder dating app. One profile immediately caught her attention, 28-year-old Gable Tosti. He wasn't the type of young man she usually liked. He looked like a guy who spent too much time in the gym, and his blindingly white smile seemed fake. But in the photo, he resembled a movie actor. By liking his photo, Wariana noticed that the guy sent her a message, "You are amazing, and I want to get to know you better." Wariana always valued intelligence above appearance and loved a good conversation with someone who had interesting opinions to discuss. Since she was single, she decided that a little flirting would lift her spirits. Wariana was a passionate defender of animal rights with a plethora of other interests, including photography, drawing, gaming, and anime. She was also known for her sense of humor. At 25, her sister encouraged Wariana to explore Tinder, and they gradually switched the topic to intimacy. Their correspondence continued for days, filled with jokes. While Gable didn't quite meet all of Wariana's requirements, she found him to be somewhat normal and good-looking. Feeling adventurous, they exchanged numbers. On August 7th, Gable and Wariana met at a nightclub on Cavill Avenue. CCTV footage captured them greeting each other with awkward hugs. Gable, who is 6 feet 11 inches and weighs 200 pounds, with petite 5 feet 4 inches Wariana, who weighs 125 pounds. A few minutes later, they were seen entering the beer garden of the Surfers' Paradise Beer Garden, then reappearing in front of the cameras, walking into a convenience store where they bought a 6-pack of beer before taking a short walk to Gable's Avalon apartment. It was about 9 p.m. Just 15 minutes later, Wariana and Gable could be seen entering the high-rise apartment building where Gable lived on the 14th floor. For the next 4 hours, they drank beer, with Gable bringing vodka several times. They even took several selfies, which Wariana posted on her Facebook page. At 1:06 a.m. on August 8th, Gable pressed record on his phone, but less than 2 hours later, Wariana was dead. Gable Tosti chose his apartment in the high-rise building because of its close proximity to the bar and the clubs in Surfers' Paradise, the infamous party strip, which was a year-round draw for attractive women looking for fun. This suited Gable's interests as someone who wanted quick intimate without commitment. Over the past 3 years, he had slept with 270 women, and this number was not an approximation. Gable kept a handwritten log of every girl he had been with, including the dates of each meeting. Gable also began making audio recordings of his dates on his mobile phone as a protective measure, as it was unknown how each meeting could turn out. Based on his experience, some girls were just crazy. Due to troubles with women complaining that he scared them, Gable was banned from 3 of the largest clubs in Surfer's Paradise. Now, every time a new club opened, security guards would kick him out even before he had the chance to drink, and he could not understand what he had done to deserve such a reputation. Furthermore, he had always struggled to understand women and people in general. Gable grew up on the Gold Coast, but over the years, the city known as Paradise brought him a great deal of suffering. Throughout his school years, he was bullied. Gable's parents treated him well, but even at home, he felt overwhelmed by the rituals he had established for himself to cope with his anxiety. The situation improved a little in the last year of high school. One day, Gable tried alcohol, and after a few drinks, the awkwardness, anxiety disappeared. He made several fake IDs to go to nightclubs like some of his peers and soon became very popular. He was approached for help in making such IDs. In the summer of 2004, everything went wrong. Gable raised his profile by selling fake IDs to minors who flocked to the city to celebrate school week. He managed to earn $30,000 before he was caught. When the police checked his computer, they found that another one of his activities was trying to counterfeit money. He had made a near-perfect copy of a $50 bill. During his trial, the psychiatrist who evaluated Gable describing him as poorly prepared to deal with people and as socially distant, emotionally aloof. He then received community service and got a job at his father's carpet-laying company. He also withdrew from everyone and lived as a recluse for 5 years. 2010 was a significant year for Gable. He went to a bodybuilding forum. He decided that he needed to communicate properly and create a network of friends. But the problem was that Gable did not know where to start. Should he create a Facebook page or find old acquaintances on Odnoklassniki? Advice and recommendations poured in. A few days later, Gable posted an update. He talked about one of his classmates with whom he hung out, went to a club, and once timidly kissed a girl goodbye, but nothing came of it. This was only with one girl, and it happened 5 years ago. After reading the advice and gaining determination, Gable wrote that he was dating a girl, this time trying to be more persistent. As a result, they had intimate in the back seat of his car. Gable worked 4 hours a day and devoted most of his time to finding a partner, sharing all the details of his successes, failures on the internet. One of the forum participants offered to buy him more drinks, although this was unethical. As a result, the number of girls with whom Gable slept was already approaching 100. However, as he wrote, the 100th girl did not impress him in any way, but he really wanted to reach that milestone. One of the forum participants reproached Gable for his desire to have intimacy with as many women as possible, to which he replied that this was how he raised his self-esteem. In April 2013, Gable discovered Tinder. It was the perfect place to date, considering his bad reputation with clubs, which had reduced his dating opportunities to 0. But even Tinder dates were unreliable, and more than once, Gable became annoyed when he was rejected. For example, a woman insisted that he leave before she got angry. He was also frustrated that some women thought Tinder was something more than a one-time meeting. Recently, Gable experienced another losing streak. He met 4 different women, 3 of whom came to his house for drinks but were not in the mood for intimacy. By August 2014, Gable had slept with 270 women, stated that it was a game of numbers. At the same time, he was heavily into alcoholic drinks, and the situation began to spiral out of control. He had recently encountered problems with the police when he failed to stop at their request and engaged in a chase with flashing lights. When he was finally stopped, his blood alcohol level was 4 times higher than the acceptable norm. On August 1, 2014, Gable went on Tinder and matched with an attractive dark-haired beauty with high bangs and big expressive brown eyes, Wariena. She was at least a 7 out of 10, maybe even an 8, Gable thought, evaluating her according to his classification system, according to which he didn't sleep with girls rated below 7. At 1:06 a.m., August 8, 2014, they drank beer together, and soon after, Gable turned on the recording on his phone. Warriena said she was already very drunk, while Gable's voice sounded sober. Later, tests would show that her blood alcohol level exceeded the norm threefold. Their conversation became inebriated and meaningless. She jokingly fought with Gable, demonstrating a brutal technique she had learned. Drunk, she requested another drink, so Gable poured her 2 glasses of vodka. By sound in the recording, she then even hit Gable for no reason. Things took a different turn when she expressed a desire to go home but couldn't find her phone. Warriena accused him of stealing it. When he laughed, she began to get angry, which led to a new outburst of anger. Later, Gable and Warriena were heard arguing. She started throwing small decorative stones at him. The police then could see them on the living room floor. At some point, Gable knocked her down, and his tone became rougher, while threats disturbed Warriena's voice, which sounded strained. Her breathing was constricted. It was clear she was being pinned face down. She agreed to leave, but Gable held her back. Gable said he had been beaten up by her. Now she should stay the night and he would cook her something, because he was a forgiving man. Warriena calmed down and suggested look out the window, implying she meant the balcony. Gable replied, just don't jump off the balcony. The sound of struggling and the scratching of a tape recorder. Then came a line that would soon become very significant. You're lucky I didn't throw you off the balcony, you crazy little bitch. Followed by a heated argument. Then, the sound of another struggle was heard and Warriena apologized in fear. A sound indicated the police believed he was unlocking the balcony door. Warriena started screaming. She screamed the word no a total of 33 times in 46 seconds. Body language experts later described them as the wild cries of someone genuinely afraid for their life. After 2:21 a.m., Gabrielle awoke to the sounds of fighting and panicked screams from people living on the floor directly above her apartment. Gabrielle jumped up and looked out through the glass door of the terrace. What she saw horrified her, 2 legs hanging from the balcony above. Before Gabrielle had time to react, a woman slipped down. According to witnesses, Warriena hanging, facing the building. A Gable's neighbor saw Warriena's face when she started to fall and witnessed the horror in her eyes. That look would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was so close he could have reached out and touched her when she fell past the balcony. Gable, by his own admission, saw how Warriena disappeared from the balcony but claimed he didn't hear her scream, even though it was recorded on his phone at 2:21 a.m. when she slipped and fell from the balcony, crashing to her death. A few minutes later, breathing heavily, Gable left his apartment and went downstairs. He noticed emergency workers approaching the building below, then went back inside and left through the garage exit. After wandering the streets for a while, he did not approach his apartment building. At 2:40 a.m., Gable called a store and ordered a slice of pizza before calling his father at 3:15 a.m. In that conversation, he talked about Warriena falling off the balcony, swearing he did not push the girl and wondering why this always happens to him. At 4:44 a.m., the father picked up his son and took him to the family home. The media storm that would follow the death of Warriena would begin in a few hours and would be called the Tinder murder. Reporters from major publications were riveted on Gable's personality. They dug into his past, analyzing his beliefs, psychiatric reports, and social networks, studying his posts on bodybuilding forums. Public opinion quickly turned against him. All attention was directed at the woman who just fell from his 14th floor balcony. The accusation in court focused on the fact that he recorded the incident on his phone, although this same recording proved that Gable was not near Warriena when she fell from the balcony. The prosecutor's office claimed that the threat and violence from Gable brought Warriena to such a state of horror that she deemed it necessary to escape through the balcony. In October 2016, Gable Tosti was found not guilty of the murder of Warriena Wright. The verdict was met with mixed reactions. Some supported it with applause while others shouted insults. Since then, this division has raged on social media groups, and regardless of how one approaches this case, many questions still remain unanswered. For example, why did Warriena scream for 46 seconds? Why did she seem to believe escaping was her only option if she could have called her neighbors for help while being on the edge? It's hard to believe that a very drunk person wouldn't realize the mortal danger of climbing over a railing at such a height. One theory that has received little attention posits that in a fit of rage, Gable grabbed Warriena from the balcony to pulling her back inside. Warriena managed to grab the ledge for a moment before falling to her death. And why did Gable, during the audio recording, mention balconies and the words jump and throw? The tragic death of Warriena Wright in August 2014 remains a haunting mystery, provoking intense debate and leaving many questions unanswered. Gable Tustee's acquittal has done nothing to quell the controversy, as the chilling audio recording and Warriena's desperate screams continue to fuel speculation about what drove her to climb over that 14th floor balcony. Was it fear, intoxication, or a fatal misunderstanding?